Right. Good morning. Good morning. You know, trying to get the timing of things, like this program that I use, like became a little bit more efficient, and so my it like doesn't delay as much as it used to. So like, I used to be able to like click go live and then put on the beginning, and now it's like I click go live and there's like a flash second of me before like my theme music and such. Um, welcome. Good morning to me. Good evening to most of you. Um, and so yeah, let's talk about some bridges. So the it's a funny thing about the bridge of in Croyane. Um, there's so many things about the chapter that just don't make sense. So like first of all, let me, the first of all, the idea that a 1,000-year old city in a like marshy river environment would still exist is already ridiculous. Okay, so like that city would have like sunk in the mud or been like washed away a long time ago. Like a riverbank city of like a huge river, like it just wouldn't exist anymore. Like it's so silly. The fact that like some of the bridge is still like in place, and still not the entire bridge is up, but like much of the bridge is still like in place after 1,000 years is ridiculous. Like I understand that there's still some sections of aqueduct in like dry area Spain or whatever that's still like up, but it's like one tiny section in an area that doesn't get much rain or water. The whole reason why you had the aqueduct, and so like it's able to stay up barely. Plus, there's like people trying to preserve these things now. But the fact that like a bridge would be in a huge flowing river would be up after 1,000 years, and the city itself wouldn't have sunk into the mud long ago, is already really stupid. Also, there's rotting wood on the bridge. Like it's the whole thing is like, how would any rotting wood still exist after 1,000 years? Like when we talk about like preservation, the reason like Egypt is so important to people's minds is that Egypt was preserved because it was in this dry environment. And there's actually historians that talk about how there may have been all sorts of very important civilizations, but because they're in a wet, marshy environment, you're not going to have the same sort of preservation of everything. Like your documents aren't gonna survive. Like, your paintings aren't going to survive. But when you're in dry Egypt and everything's like preserved in a tomb, you get to have this like record of everything. But so 1,000 years of Croyane still being there is ridiculous. But we bring up like Tyrion and this ship going down the river, and there's so obviously you're supposed to get this like creepy idea that either he's in some sort of time loop or there's a teleportation or something. But many different explanations that people that I've heard going forward that make more sense. So first off, people talk about, well, there could just be like a tiny little whirlpool in the river where he's kind of flowing down and they just kind of do a circle and then they kind of go. And Tyrion's distracted. They're in an argument. He specifically talks about how you shouldn't look at the torch or else you're going to get blinded and things like this. So it could easily be that they got in a little whirlpool, went back and did it again. Or it was just another bridge. Like there's nothing, they sit there and say the Bridge of Dreams, but it could have just been another bridge. And that they were just passing a second one, which is also pretty logical. Another one is George R. R. Martin actually lived upon the Hudson River actually changes direction of its flow, depending on like the moon and things like that. That there could have been a moment in which that the water starts flowing backwards again, and he grew up on a river that changed its course, and so you could go back and forth with this, like the boat could have passed and then gone reverse, though it's pretty fast for that. And then one that came to me recently that I actually think is pretty logical as well is the river is in a different location, and we talk about they talk about this with the 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 inn at the crossroads being at a different location than what it used to be. Like, it used to be at the bank of the Trident, but you could imagine a situation where, and he talks about the bridge being kind of a snaky river, like it's not a straight line bridge, but you could imagine a situation where there was once a single bridge, but now the river itself goes up and curves because over 1,000 years the river has changed its flow and its course and everything, and that we're remembering a bridge going from one bank to another, but that's all shifted around, and so you could conceivably have a river flow through double bridges, or it could have been a double bridge from the start. But the though it's it is sort of funny and interesting to think about, like, could it actually be a time loop? Like, was there something going on with time that could change things? But I can't even think about, like, I don't think I can think of a reason or ability for how time traveling Bran would be able to do something like that. How he would get time travel in this localized location for just like one little blip. It would seem a lot easier to get those stone men to jump earlier than to put somebody in a time loop. So I have a super chat here about can we hear a rant about why you hate the Silmarillion? Yes, it's pretty dry, but you can't tell it's Tolkien's. But you can tell it's Tolkien's main story, while Lord of the Rings is his story's climax conclusion. I suppose retroactively. I mean, certainly when Tolkien was also like writing it as he went along. There's definitely the main thing that people note is the difference between the ring in The Hobbit versus the ring in Lord of the Rings. That these are clearly two different rings with clearly two different sets of powers, clearly two different feelings about it. Like, one is just an invisibility ring, and it's fun because it's a ring that makes you invisible, and then it becomes, oh well, actually, like, you're constantly being watched by Sauron, and you have like feelings of evil and dread, and you're getting sucked in. Your soul is getting sucked into loving and worshiping it, and all of these sorts of things that were just kind of like retroactively changed. And so there is a lot of that with the Silmarillion too. He wrote Lord of the Rings, and yeah, he's got all this backstory, and he thought broadly about it. And then once you kind of put it to paper, you're going to have changes. I mean, my problem with the Silmarillion is that when I read it, it was very just clear, cut and dry. Like, God exists, and magic created these creatures, and the mythology was presented as fact. Now, I know when I talked to Yoyston at Man of the West, like, he was trying to say, no, there's actually a bit more subtlety, and you got to remember that this is like a written text by people in universe. He didn't necessarily believe, think that dwarves really popped out of stone when they wrote when he put that into the Silmarillion. Which I don't know how much I buy it, because like when I did read it, like, it felt very fact, like, this is what happened and this is our creation myth. So, but of course, like, like art changes and everything. So, and plus Tolkien's dead, so we'll never know like his true motivations. But so in just that sense, I thought it was very dry. And when you actually put like a real god into a universe and real evil in a universe, like the literal fucking devil is in the Silmarillion, and there's an actual god with angels, then all the nuance of the story kind of goes away, like the subtlety of the characters and what is evil and what is one's purpose and things like that. So I guess I don't like even how the Silmarillion colors Lord of the Rings. Like it makes Lord of the Rings into a very cut and dry good and evil story, inescapably so, because you've established an actual god. Like, no, God exists. Like he created everybody. And so that's kind of just my problem with it in general. Plus, it's just not a very readable or fun thing in my opinion. But yeah, if as that it's like their in-universe Bible and it's not necessarily supposed to be true, that's more interesting to me. That's a much more interesting tale. So it's that is the question, like, is it supposed to be as inaccurate as the Old Testament? And the real problem is that there's like so many fans when they absorb Lord of the Rings knowledge, and I was one of these. You kind of want to learn all of these factoids, and then you kind of like you have to accept certain things as fact to move on, when in fact like a lot of stuff didn't really happen. And so that is the question. Like, were there really like gems that were part of trees, and was there really a devil character and all of these sorts of things? Were dwarves really created out of rocks, and orcs twisted angels and all sorts of things that you're not, that we don't actually see, like we don't witness, but we have the Silmarillion tale of. If it were just legend and it didn't necessarily happen, I think that's more interesting. So yeah. I heard Lord of the Rings is part of the 40K universe. The I saw a very interesting idea about whether Warhammer 40K is there any hope for that universe? And so, and it was a video about, like, logically speaking, because most people go into Warhammer 40K and they're like, man, this universe is fucked. Like, this universe, like, not only is the realm of man horrible, but like, the galaxy's been split in half and half of it's gone to chaos, and there's this like alien race of Tyranids which seems unstoppable, that's going to kill us all, and they're only supposed to be like a scout ship. Like the wrath of the Tyranids are coming. It's just there's so much bad. There's no way that this universe could possibly survive. Let's just enjoy killing each other. And the entire video was about how, actually, logically speaking, no, the universe is actually pretty stable. Like, most of the things that made the Empire of Man into the horrible world it was, happened because of a few individual choices, and that those choices could be undone pretty easily as they were done. And the Tyranids, human beings have been able to come up with like all sorts of technology to fight them off, and who knows, and not to mention, if they seriously really became a problem, the other races in the universe that are problems, like the orcs, would turn against them, and so really there perhaps is hope for the Warhammer 40K universe. But I guess there's hope in Lord of the Rings as well. They defeated all of them. But yeah, obviously, like some of the stuff was just shoved in there. There are dwarfs in there's a dwarf race that's like never played, hasn't been played since like the 80s in Warhammer 40k. Anyway, little side thing. Is there a connection between the Children of the Forest and Charlemagne conquering Christianity? The Saxons pagans. Their leader was called Wudukukind, which literally means child of the forest. Huh. I mean, I had not heard this idea, but generally speaking, the Children of the Forest are just kind of a stand-in for indigenous culture, and then the other cultures are kind of the colonial power. Like, and this is uh, you know pretty heavy-handed from George R. R. Martin. Like, people coming in not understanding the local culture. Also, it involves kind of the stereotype that the local cultures were always in balance with nature, which kind of gets into like white American projection on the American Indians in America. Like, oh, the American Indians, they were so peaceful and in touch with nature. And it's like, they were a diverse group, okay? Like, you cannot say anything definitive about the American Indians. And they were so different and diverse. Like, it's ridiculous. But like, so in general, like, they're supposed to be the local indigenous people that we from outsiders always seen as savage, but in fact they were like more advanced in some ways, and we just didn't understand them, and we came in with our ever expanding, unsustainable like cultural model of expansionism, and just destroyed without really understanding, and so yeah, you're gonna get that same sort of idea of like, Southern Europeans against like the Northern European Druidic peoples, historically, but he's largely basing this off of like a story called "And Seven Times Never Kill Man," which is based off of like Rudyard Kipling's writings, which is about England going into India. So it's, but and then he's in George R. R. Martin's mind, he's relating to America going into Vietnam and things like this. But it's always supposed to be like, expanding colonial power, local indigenous people, over and over again. But, so it's interesting. I mean, it could be that he chose that idea, Children of the Forest, but he has used children before. I think in Beauty and the Beast, like the people that like hid underneath the city that the Beast lived with were also called the Children, and things like that. So it might be just coincidence. That's fully possible, but you never know. You never know. Oh gosh, what a question. Did Tywin try to kill Tyrion by hoping to give him an STD through Taisha, supposedly 100 guards, silver coins? I'm trying to remember. Did Tywin force him to rape his wife too? That's a big when does he tell the story? I mean, I doubt he really thought of it that way, like trying to kill his son with like horse pox, as they call it in Westeros. No, it says drive the lesson home. Tywin forced his son to be the last man. And he paid a gold coin. I think, I don't know also like how effective it would be in the, maybe if there's like a lingering, it's kind of gross, right, to think about, like if there's like a lingering semen in her vagina that he could like, is he getting pox from all the other guards? It probably would be a horrible STD mix in there, wouldn't it? But it's hard to believe that like Tyrion that Tywin was thinking that far ahead about like, well, even though we do hear about pox, the horse pox in Ice and Fire, STDs don't seem to be as widespread as they are in our society, So, hey Preston, longtime fan. Do you think Winds will ever actually release? Could you see the wait going on for 5 more years? Also, do you have any concrete plans to kill any POV characters in the fanfic? So I think the odds of Winds of Winter getting released are low, but I don't think they're impossible. I think like little things can help. Like, for instance, the writer's strike might actually help in the sense that it's going to slow down production on Dunk and Egg. And prevent George from like being involved there. However, at this point, it seems like he uses any distraction to slow down. And I don't even think like the problem with the Winds of Winter boils down to his distractions now in the past 12 years. I think the problem stems back all the way to 2005, earlier 2001, when he was writing A Feast for Crows. Like you can tell in his writing that he is world building and expanding more and more. Creating more and more without wrapping anything up. And so it's not just a single problem of like, oh, I need to write this book. Like, conceivably he could, if Winds of Winter ever comes out, I think it's going to have the same problems as Feast for Crows and A Dance with Dragons. I think it's going to be an ever expanding book, and that people will read it and go, oh my gosh, like, how is he going to wrap this up in one book? This is insane. He's going to create more characters and they're all going to still be living, and like he's going to have all this backstory and everything. And it's just going to be even richer and richer, but also impossible to actually bring together into a cohesive narrative. I think he's fundamentally lost like the plot, like he's lost the ability to wrap it up. So, I do think that there's a chance that a book could come out, The Winds of Winter, but I don't think it'll be any sort of like conclusion. I don't think it'll be anything pulling stuff together where you kind of see like, oh gosh, what's going to happen in this like final conclusion. So it's, but it's possible. It's possible that he'll put out a number of pages like he did with Feast for Crows and A Dance with Dragons. Like those are unfinished books. And the experience with the fanfic has been very illuminating. Like going in and being like, well, like each time we go into a chapter and we say, okay, we're in a location, and we kind of say like, okay, what characters exist here? Who needs to be mentioned? Who needs to be wrapped up? So like, the Samuel chapter, for example, has like section in Lice. Right? And you kind of go through and you go, whoa, well, what characters are in Lice? And you're like, holy crap. And you go through this like list of characters and you're like, George introduced all of them. He seemed to have introduced them for a reason. We need to bring them in, coordinate them into a cohesive story, and then somehow like wrap it up and like move it on. And that goes for all of the cities. It goes for Volantis. It goes for Marine. It goes for Karth. It goes for Vastoth Rock. It goes for Bravos. You know, it doesn't necessarily go for like it goes a little bit for Tyrosh and Norvos, but you can perhaps say that there's no reason to ever go to Kohor or something or Lorath. But there's a lot of these locations where you kind of go, oh gosh, it's a lot of work to come up with a plot that involves all of these loose threads that can come together. And so I just don't see I see a possibility like 5%. I put it like 5% chance that in the next 5 years we will get The Winds of Winter, like a book with a number of pages. But I don't think it'll be what people want. Um, you know, it'll certainly like leave people at the end going, "Oh my gosh, like I can't believe you could wrap this up in a single book." But you know, it's just not how Feast and Dance was written. Like I realized like going through Dance, even when like doing research before the stream, like going and reading about Crow Yane and being like, oh my gosh, like why is this here? Like what on earth is why them talking about like what it's like north of the Sorrows and the legal situation and the nature of the Rhoyne, and you're just like, what are you doing? Like, what are you doing? Completely unnecessary kind of stuff. But yeah, so we do have, there are some plans to kill point of view characters in the fanfic. I mean, there just needs to be, there needs to be, but the question is like, which point of view characters? Because you kind of have this situation where, and George will have this problem too, you have characters that have been introduced and you feel like they need to be used at some point. They've been lingering long enough that they have to do something, and that there's no other character that can carry water plot-wise. And I'd say like Ario Hota or Aaron Damphair are characters like this. There's no one near them. They've been introduced. Hardly any time has been given to them. So you feel like something needs to happen with them. But there's also no one around them. No one else can tell the story of Euron, like unless Sam gets captured. No one else can tell the Dornish story except for Hota. And then you've got the other character. Then you've got on the other hand like the big characters where you're like, oh gosh, like they've been with us the whole story. It seems to be the story about them. The Dany, the Tyrion, the Jaime, the Cersei. Like how do you kill off a character that feels like the story is about them? So you'd have to find like a really important reason to kill them off. Like it would be so much better and easier, like wrapping things up if you could kill off Tyrion. But then, isn't it Tyrion's story? So it's really hard. Even though, like, my God, like, oh, you'd free up so much space, and you there's so many things you'd then not have to resolve anymore because you just killed off Tyrion. But then you've killed off the main character of the story, So, but I think a big help is like leaving Jon out of as a point of view, But that's about it. It's hard. He was meant to take the mind of Hodor to help Bran to the Wall and change the past, but Hodor remained in his mind. They moved to Essos, got involved in politics, and unintentionally ended the Long Night. Yeah, it'd be nice. It'd be nice if one of the things I was thinking about with Hodor's mind was Bran talks about how like Hodor like is hiding in a corner. But then I wonder like, is that the real Hodor? Maybe like the real Hodor has been hiding like from the other Hodor. Like the real Hodor, the fully intelligent Hodor, is still hiding and hidden and pushed aside and has been pushed, his entire life. Horrible thought. It's very being John Malkovich kind of horror. Being like a captive participant in your own body. Really, really horrific thought. So poor Hodor. But it'd be so nice to think that there was that Hodor had had somehow escaped. um, yeah, if only, if only. I'm like trying to think like what could happen. Um, Hodor is definitely the Shrouded Lord. That would be much better. Poor Hodor. Um, George said that one of the themes he was exploring is simps make lousy kings and morons ruling well. Where do we actually see this in the story? Um, if anything, it's like with Renly, right? Like Renly is supposed to be a sort of naive, a little too naive, um, and that he was supposed to be a great king at some point, or perhaps Rhaegar. Um, he explored Rhaegar before with regards to in the book Dying of the Light. He has a Rhaegar character, Jan Vickery, and Jan Vickery is like this super progressive character who's trying to transform his society. His society is like ridiculously conservative, and so he's trying to play by the rules and become powerful, but then transform it. But it's causing way too much like rebellion and division to do so, and so he's supposedly kind of seen as a failure. And he's kind of the Rhaegar character, like. We kind of, even though we don't know much about Rhaegar, we kind of imagine him as this guy that was supposed to make the world a better place, but he died and he wasn't able to figure it all out. And it's the same with Renly. I think he's supposed to be naive. I don't know if there's like too many simp characters, like in the sense of like Tommen just kind of like giving up power and trying to make everybody nice. I suppose he was trying to do that with Robert too. That he was always placating the Lannisters and trying to do that, and people were just walking all over him. And that was would be Viserys the First as well. But the thing is like, do we really have that many? Like, I understand that this is a stereotype that we need the strong man to keep everybody in line, and he has to be like savvy and somewhat vicious in order to maintain power and control, and that some people are too nice, but do we really have that in history, like the too nice of a character who like gets power and then just can't do anything because he's too nice? Like even when you think of like the classic American example of like Jimmy Carter was super nice, but I don't know if his like what people try to blame Jimmy Carter for was in his control, and whether it was really had to do with him being too nice. Like the Iran hostage situation and the failed like rescue mission had nothing to do with like Jimmy Carter being nice. Like it had nothing to do with like him being too soft. So I don't, inflation under Jimmy Carter, like that was nothing to do with him being like nice. And so I can imagine that being a theme that George wants to talk about. I just don't know if there's really that situation in history of like, that guy, he was just too nice and therefore he failed. That's certainly people's mindset. Like, I've got to be rough and evil and mean to keep people in line. But, show me this, like, I don't know, maybe I'm missing it, but like, show me the situation in history where there's this like really nice leader who was just too nice and everybody like walked all over him. And, he wasn't able to get anything done. Why do you think George R. R. Martin uses sir instead of sir? Just stylistic choice. Yeah, it's like throwing in all the Y's and shit. It's silly. I don't think there's any reason other than that. Like, they're just, I think that's pretty standard fantasy and space trope kind of stuff, that this world is a little different, it's a little exotic, they use a lot of letters that we don't use. You know, like when you want to make space seem exotic, like you run into like alien races called like the Quaisaxians and stuff. Like for some reason, like a foreign culture uses the letters and sounds that we use the least. They use them the most. That's just how space and fantasy works. You know, like we hardly ever use Y's. Therefore, they use Y's all of the time. You know, like in Westeros, they're just using Y's. She goes to Karth. We hardly ever use X's, but then she means Zarozo and Daxus. Oh my gosh, they're just throwing X's all over the place because it's foreign. And we know, like, in a foreign place, you use all the letters we use the least. Like, that's just how it goes. Sir, like, oh man, it's a foreign. They use a completely different letter that has the same sound. Like, sir. I think it's just that. Like, I think it's just like the trope of like we want to make something seem foreign and exotic, and therefore it's gonna have just a, you know, it's just gonna have that little difference, you know, of spelling it different. My gosh, like, you know, God forbid we spell Quentin, you know, with an I-N. No, he's got to be a YN. Like, that changes everything. That changes it. I'm now in an exotic land where I cannot. It's so exotic that they use Y's instead of I's. It's you know. But I think that's it. I think it's like once you actually like think about it, you're just like, man, that's. It's really quite lame. Like, I mean, they do it in. I'm trying to think of. I mean, the other one we were. Talk about this a little bit with when the Sam chapter eventually comes out, but why Star Wars insists on using so many accents in the middle of their like. Like in Star Wars, like like fiction, like don't they use a whole bunch of like weird accents? I'm trying to think. Like maybe I'm confusing with a different. Um, I'm like looking for like Star Wars characters that have like useless. I mean, he uses weird sounds, but I don't know if they use. I thought they were like, oh yeah, like Kira. There's a character named Kira, um, played by Amelia Clark. Like, why does her name need to be Qi apostrophe RA? Like Kira. Like, what does that add versus just calling her Kira? Because don't they just call her Kira in the in the movie? Like her name can't be Kira. Like it has to be Qi apostrophe RA. Like R'hllor. Like do any of us say like R'hllor? Like when we talk, we all just call it R'hllor, and that's what they called it in the show. But George had to throw an apostrophe in there. So one of the characters, like the character of Dahan, which became the character in the Sam chapter that we're using, his name in his original story is Ka'ara Dahan. C apostrophe ARADAHAN, there's some discussion with the editor about like what we're gonna name the character, because he wanted to call him Kara Dahan, and I was like, I don't like all these apostrophes. And there's actually a character in Ice and Fire named Denzo Dahan, D apostrophe HAN. So he was like, well, if we make him part of the same family, he could be Kara Dahan. And I'm like, that's just too many apostrophes. Like, plus like Kara, is that Cara Dune? Is that character from Star Wars? Yeah, Cara Dune. and it was a male character, and I didn't want it to sound like female, stuff like that. All these sorts of things. But I just think it's so funny that like apostrophes are just thrown in willy nilly all over the place. Last stream you talked about the cycle of fear and violence in societies. You should watch Miyazaki's Nausicaa of the Valley of the Wind. It's central theme. Okay, that's interesting. Let me look that up real quick. So I was chatting with Carmine before I went on, and he's like, "What's the topic going to be?" And 1984 fantasy. Oh, interesting. Okay. This is what he's talking about. I'm gonna see if I can find that. I'm sure Carmine's watched it. But we're talking like Carmine was like, "What subject are you going to talk about today?" And I was like, because we always like get onto the guns. And I was like, what if my topic is why are gun nuts always losers? And then I have like a picture of Kyle Rittenhouse. But I was thinking about that. Like, what is it about gun nuts that where they are all kind of just like losery people? And there is something about like fear and a lack of power and thinking that the way to ameliorate all of that is to just get a gun, like to boil down the world in the sense of like, I don't have any power, but if I get this gun, I'll suddenly have power. Like I have fear. I mean, if you're getting a gun, you believe you're in danger, right? Like you believe you're fearing something, right? Like that's the whole function of a gun is you're fearing something. And therefore like you're trying to get that gun to overcome the fear, or you're trying to like establish power, but that means you kind of feel like you don't have power, right? Like the desire for power, it means that like you feel powerless and you're trying to like compensate for it, right? And so, this is why like when people see like people driving fancy cars, everyone's like, oh, they're compensating. Like, of course they're compensating. Like no one needs to have a flashy car unless you're compensating for something. It goes the same when people are like, oh, that kid over there, he colored his hair because he wants attention. Well, of course he does. Like, of course. Like, of course. Like, the water is wet. The sky is blue. Of course. So there is something to, like, this idea of, like, if you live in fear, you desire an ability to like, try to have power and something to overcome that fear. But everyone just completely recognizes it and they're like, oh God, you're a scaredy cat, It's like the, like, I don't know, say like I'm a bald guy, right? Bald guys that wear hats, like clearly like he wouldn't need to wear a hat all the time if he wasn't insecure about the fact that he's bald. Like, obviously, right? Like that's the function of the hat, to like cover up the fact that he's bald. Like, so, but everybody kind of looks at guys with hats and goes, oh, it's a bald guy with a hat. Like everybody does that. So, I mean, so it's the same with like guns and fear. Like obviously, like if you have a gun, you're fearful, and everybody sees that fear and they smell it and they kind of go, oh, loser, Yeah. Can you do a Jack Vance Dying Earth book club like Thousand Worlds? It is said to have influenced Martin. Jack Vance is insanely influential to Martin in terms of like writing style and feeling and just like the feeling of the world and everything like that. It's I mean, incredibly so. Like if you read Vance, you just feel like you're reading Martin. I mean, I'd say Martin's better than Vance in creating more interesting characters. But you definitely just get that feeling from Vance. Now, doing a Dying Earth book club, it's just, oh God, I've got so many fucking things on my plate. So busy all the time. I mean, it's one of these things where I'm like, oh, I would love to do that. I would love to do that. But it's just like, oh God, so many things on the plate. Like, just cannot, like, get to that. Like, I'm exhausted all the time. Do you think it would be better if George R. R. Martin just continues The Song of Ice and Fire without an actual endpoint? I say this because the world itself has taken on a life of itself. No, I don't. I don't think that would be better. And I say that in the sense that, like, George R. R. Martin, he's a great writer. He is, and I've told this to his face. Like, when I met George R. R. Martin, I, like, told him, like, you write incredible endings. Like, it is one of the best things about his stories, if not like the best thing, is you read that last page and it's just you just get punched in the gut. Like, every time you're like, oh God, he knows how to end a story. Oh my God, he's fucking good. Like, and you're going through a George R. R. Martin story and you're like, yeah, this is fine. And then you get to that last page and it's just boom. And you're like, oh, that was painful. That was painful, but that was really good. That was really, oh my God, like, I mean, I might as well explain, like, if you haven't read Meat House Man, many of you won't, but I'll spoil Meat House Man if you haven't read it. But, like, Meat House Man is about this guy who, he works as it's a universe where people can control dead bodies with like telepathically using technology. So slave labor, there's no slave labor, but people, like, are dead and they just control their bodies with, like, telepathic, like, machines in their head. And so you have the, like, corpse handlers who, like, can control, like, several, like, at a time. And so the main character, like, they finish work and they go to the whorehouse and, he's having sex with a corpse. And he's like, whoever the handler is fucking awesome. This is, like, the best sex I've ever had. And he finishes and he tells everybody, like, the other dudes. And they're like, dude, there was no corpse handler. That like, the corpse subconsciously goes into your head. You're, like, controlling the corpse yourself. And the main character is so disgusted by the idea that he was, like, essentially masturbating that he swears off, like, corpse sex. And he goes into, like, real relationships. And so he tries to have this, like, he falls in love with this girl who, like, he's super in love with her and he puts her on a pedestal and she denies him and he's like, fine. And then he gets into he recovers from getting denied and he gets into another relationship. And then the girl, like, leaves him for his best friend. And it's just super painful. And so at the end, he's in this third relationship and he's just, like, a master corpse handler. And he's, like, using corpses to battle in arenas, fighting pits. And then at the end, he goes home to his girlfriend, and his girlfriend is, like, perfect and she's wonderful. And then at the end, you kind of realize that, like, she's a corpse and that he's been, like, he's controlling her. Like, all the pain of dealing with real women led him to want the ultimate submissive woman, which was just, like, him controlling a corpse, which is this huge statement. He's essentially just masturbating. And it's this huge statement about, like, George R. R. Martin saying, like, if you're into submissive women, you're just masturbating. Like, it's a crazy, like, ending. And it was just, like, the first time I read it, I was like, oh God, because he builds it up. He spends his time, like, you go through his relationships and it's so painful for the character to, like, get dumped, like, those two times. And then he's just at the end, like, oh God, you're just, like, in a relationship with a corpse. Like, and that's the story. And you're like, oh my God, so good. So good. And so when I say like, oh, would it be better if it was just like open ended, like I don't know, Star Wars or something, where it's just this world that we're Warhammer 40K, like you'll never have an ending. It's just like a world we're playing in. And I'm like, no, because I know what George R. R. Martin is capable of, and what he's capable of is a fucking fantastic ending. If we could just get there, like that would be the best part. Would be that ending, which is too bad. It's too bad that we're not going to get to that because it's his wheelhouse. Thank you, Gus. Thank you. Is Quaithe just a red herring at this point? I don't think she's a red herring, but I think she's a mystery box that I don't necessarily think George thought about, like who she was. Like he's just like, okay, I'm gonna have this mystery character. She's gonna be super important. I haven't decided who she is gonna be, and then, I don't know if he still has decided. I think it's just that. But I don't think she's a red herring. I think that in George R. R. Martin's mind, she was going to be very important, and she was going to get looped back in. So in the fanfic, she's going to be in the next Daenerys chapter. Dany's going to go to Karth, and that's just kind of the situation with that. So. Simping for RFK or JFK or RFK. I don't know if people ever thought JFK or RFK were weak guys. I mean, they were assassinated. They both of them. It's hard to. I mean, okay. People saw JFK as a simp for his own brother. So historically speaking, like different presidents had different managing styles. Like going backwards in time, so like Clinton was known for having like a Camelot structure where everyone was around the table and everybody kind of made decisions together. W was known for kind of just delegating everything to a couple guys who ran everything, kind of his, Cheney and Wolfowitz, and they kind of ran everything. Clinton had more of a Camelot model where he had all these like experts and they all kind of discussed stuff together. It was kind of seen as like a golden situation. Reagan had more of a delegation strategy where everything was kind of compartmentalized. Carter was more dictatorial, where Carter like wanted to hear everybody's input, but then he would go off, read reports, and then make decisions by himself. Nixon was more private. Him and Kissinger just kind of did everything. They didn't listen to anybody. They just did everything by themselves. Like people wouldn't even give input, and they just kind of ran everything. Johnson was known for delegation, and the reason Johnson delegated is that people were really upset that JFK had set up a Camelot model where everyone was around the table talking about issues, but RFK was the type of person that would control a conversation and take over. And because RFK was the Attorney General under JFK. And so because RFK was JFK's brother and he was kind of just like the guy who took control, like many people thought that JFK rolled over and that RFK was really the one ruling. He was the real president, kind of like Cheney was the real president under W, So but I don't know how much they were like trying to appease people. I mean, maybe, appeasing the French by getting into Vietnam, hard to say, but people certainly didn't like the fact that like RFK was so dominant. Is Melisandre sleeping with Devon Seaworth? He's Stannis' squire, but keeps him at Castle Black to attend her. That's a funny idea. because she does say that she does make the comment that Devin is in love with her, but I'm trying to think what's Devin's age? Um, does it even? Yeah, Devin's 13. Hmm. I don't want to say no on this because it's like, is that George R. R. Martin's style? Like, yes, he would put something that gross in there. Yeah, absolutely. Um, in fact, I was thinking about Oberyn Martell, and Oberyn's known for like sleeping with Ironwood's paramour and then getting into this duel and getting accused of poisoning him and all these things. But if you actually like put it from what if he was actually molested? Um, like he was a young boy when this happened, when he was caught in bed with this paramour. Um, that you could actually make him into quite a bit of a victim. Now, the problem with this is that beforehand, I think he's already fathered Obara at like the age of 12 or 13, which is kind of ridiculous, which takes away from this idea that he was this like, say, a young innocent kid that was molested. But I think that makes a more interesting story to than I'm Oberyn Martell and I was fucking when I was 12, like I but maybe he was brought to the brothel and forced into the situation by some sort of uncle, which would also be kind of like weird and creepy. Like, say Lewin Martell like brought him to the brothel and forced him into the kind of thing. That'd be kind of interesting. But yeah, I'll have to reread those chapters to see if there's any hint of that. Um, Good boy. Oh gosh. That just gave me creepy, gave me the creeps. But it may be a possibility. It may be a possibility. Um, let's see here. Get these random things. Hi, Preston. Hey, how's it going? Um, um, are there guns in Westeros? Trying to think. I don't think there's anything, which is actually kind of unusual because there's other technology that's past guns. Certainly, like telescopes and certain crossbows and the medical technology of Westeros is way advanced, like way advanced. Like the fact that they know about like boiling wine and stuff like that. But um, uh, I think gun nuts or losers is just othering everyone. If losers, you focus on them as a stranger. No, I mean, I really, in looking at the psychology of like why one needs to get really into something. Now, granted, there are people that unfortunately like they get into something because some relative is into it, and then they feel a connection because of that. Um, like I brought up the gin and tonic thing. Like when I drink a gin and tonic, I feel like I connect with my grandpa. Like he probably didn't fucking care about gin and tonics that much. But it's just like I feel that connection. A lot of people have that with guns. Like, oh, I used to go hunting with my dad. That's so I feel good about it. And same with baseball. It's like baseball. But those people tend not to be the nuts. Like the people that are the nuts, like the ones that like can't like fucking shut up about all the different models and collecting and stuff like that. They tend to be in it for other reasons, weird psychology reasons that cause you to obsess over one thing. Like I understand that we're all obsessing over ice and fire, but this is fairly innocuous and just kind of fun. Like what's the need to obsess over like one little thing? I mean, there's lots of reasons for othering, but I know plenty of people that own guns. I'm not othering anybody, but I'm saying there's something strange and you know about it. It's not like I don't know people that say like grow beards because they don't have a very good chin, or wear hats because they're bald. Like, I know all of these people. Like, and I'm sure there's some sort of weird insecurity that I have that I try to compensate for. Um, you know, um, when I was young, like my sister used to like call me stupid all the time. So I'd like maybe that caused me to become like one of these like know-it-all assholes, like because I was always trying to like prove the fact that like I wasn't insecure about the fact that I was dumb, that's sort of, we're all insecure, but it's just this, it's what like comes out, and it's just kind of obvious to people. Like certainly among all people that in my social circles, and keep in mind my social circles are urban liberal, you know, college graduates. So, take it with that grain of salt. But like in my circles, like if I announced that I had a gun, everyone would think I was a loser. Like they'd be like, "Oh my God, like what's wrong with you? You're just a loser." Like that would immediately be their thought. Um, I don't know how much othering it is, because if I chose something else, if I was like, I really like country music, they'd be like, "That's weird." Like they wouldn't think it. They wouldn't like think I was a loser. Like they'd just be like, "Huh, he's into country music." Or let's say I was into like bird watching, which is something people in the rural areas do a lot. Bird watching is an enormous, enormous American industry. So many bird watchers in America. This is like one of the hidden things about like America that no one ever talks about. Okay, there's this huge, huge culture of bird watching in America. Enormous. Doesn't get any press. But if you actually like look up like bird watching tourism in America, it's like an insane, insane industry. It's enormous. But if I brought up bird watching, everybody would be like, "Okay, you're into birds," But there's no like fundamental like weird fear associated about it, Um, is Tywin the one killing Robert's bastards? I think that makes a lot more sense than Cersei. Though I always thought, I'd always kind of chalked it up to like a Littlefinger Varys thing. But that's certainly possible. Though Tywin was really had a blind spot for the Cersei Jaime incest. I think he refused to believe, or even like in any way that they were connected like that. I forgot the line. Even though they were caught when they were young and separated when they were young, but I think there was a weird line. I know there was in the show. I'm trying to remember if there was a line. Let's see here. I'm trying to remember I mean, Kevin, for example, knows. Tyrion knows, because they all caught on. But there's something. I'm trying to remember if there's a line. I thought there was like a single line where he's like, where he gets kind of disgusted or something, where someone brings that up or something. But then again, like I say, his public personality is so different from his private personality. If we're accepting, well, I mean, we know about Shay, so we kind of know that like Tywin's public personality is very different from his private personality. So it could be that like everything that Tywin says in public, like we can't even believe it, and so So yeah, it's quite possibility, I think. Now that we're talking through it. Um, which happens first, Elon on the moon or Winds of Winter official? Does Elon have a plan to go to the moon? Is it just is the test thing for Mars? Does that go to the moon first? Is that the idea? SpaceX. They're supposed to go to the moon. Yes. Okay. So they have a plan to go to the moon. Um. Let's put the. Is that supposed to? I'm trying to think if that's planned. It's supposed to go around the moon in 2023, but they always say this shit. Next moon mission is NASA's. Dear Moon Project. I mean, also it's weird. It's like as if it's Elon going to the moon, but versus like a company. But okay, the SpaceX on the moon versus Winds of Winter. I don't know if any are going to happen anytime soon. This is a really tough one. I guess SpaceX going to the moon will probably happen first. If I'm putting like Winds of Winter at like a 5% chance. Yeah. Okay. All right. I guess I'm going SpaceX to the moon. That landing or orbiting? Even landing, though, I'd still probably say that landing has a better chance. I'm an American who lives in Japan, and I'm constantly asked if I like guns or own guns. I have zero interest in guns. Is it the same for you in Taiwan? No. And I will say that like Taiwan is significantly different from my experiences in Japan, Korea, or China, in that the Taiwanese, so many Taiwanese have been to America or traveled to or like have relatives in America, that there's not the same exoticism to an American as there is to people in the rest of Asia. When you're in Japan, even though Japan is a completely modern place that has tons of foreigners, they still have a weird fascination, a weird creepy fascination with America, and you still get stares out of the corner of your eyes, like, oh look, oh, there's a foreigner in here. Oh. Taiwan, you don't get any of that. Like everyone's just like, yeah, it's a white person, I don't care. And that's mainly because like they all have these connections to America. Like Taiwanese they all have like a brother or a cousin, and they've been to California, and they've done it and they've seen it. And so it's also, and beyond that, like they don't exoticize America. They don't think of America as being foreign in the same sense that like Korea, Japan, China do. And they're also not obsessive like the Japanese are. Like the Japanese are constantly like analyzing like, what is Japanese identity, and what is Japanese identity juxtaposed to American identity, and they think about these concepts all the time. The Taiwanese just don't think about that. They're just like not concerned, they're concerned with like their friends and their family and getting a job, and like they don't think about these cultural spheres. Like they're not obsessed with it in that way. On a side thing, like I read a really interesting article once where it was this black author where he like wrote this he asked this question to white people, and he's like, do white people think about black people as much as black people think about white people? And the answers from people were like, Actually, no. Like, white people don't really think about black people very much. Like, that's the problem. You know, well, black people like they're living in a society that's like majority white, and they think about white people all the time. And that's, you know, a weird part of the trauma of being a black American. Japanese think about Americans a lot. They, you know, and I don't know like how much Taiwanese think about it, you know. But then there's also like a political aspect to it. Like Taiwanese, because they like America and consider like America the only thing keeping their island independent and not taken over, they don't kind of like look down on American society or you know, criticize it like the rest of the world does. Like no matter where you are in the world, usually like like people have a weird idea where they're like, this and this is wrong about America. Like, why is that there? You know, like if you're in Europe, they're like, how can you guys like elect Trump? How can you guys eat food that is genetically modified? Like you get these questions like about like your society is odd and off. Taiwanese just, they don't really like pity or criticize American society like say the Japanese or the Chinese or do. So it's you know, I don't know. I also joke that like Taiwan is a pretty unexotic place. Like it's more American than it is Chinese or Japanese, you know, in its attitudes. But yeah, that's kind of the full thing on it. Like I don't feel like a foreigner here. Like I did every moment walking around in Japan. You know, in Japan you are a foreigner at all moments, you know. You don't feel like a foreigner here. You just feel like you're in America, except everything's in Chinese. You know, like that's it. And there's a lot of 7-Elevens, you know. Thank you for helping me get through my home laser treatment. It is excruciating. What is your favorite form of gender affirming care in A Song of Ice and Fire, and why is it burned men? Is that what the burned men were? Let me think about this. Burned men coming. Oh, they mutilate themselves by burning off body parts of their choosing, including fingers or nipples. More important the body part, the more prestige. I don't know if I'd really compare what the burned men are doing at any way with gender affirming care, because you know, obviously the implication here is that burned men is some sort of mutilation. While gender affirming care is not mutilation. You know, if you to mutilate is to destroy something and do something that's harmful to somebody. While, you know, various alterations to the human body you would say are not, you know, mutilation. Like I would not consider pierced ears or a nose job or circumcision or braces mutilation, though some would, you know. So burned men are specifically mutilating themselves. Like that's the point of it. They're supposed to, they're showing themselves to be tough. Gender affirming care, that's just like, I mean, if you're transitioning, like it's just imagine you woke up tomorrow and you were the opposite sex. What would you do? You know, like if I woke up tomorrow and all of a sudden, like, it's like that movie, Something Special or whatever. I don't know if you guys have ever heard about Something Special. Or Ranma 1/2 if you want to go anime. But you know, it's about this high school girl who like wishes for a dick and then like wakes up the next day with a dick. Yeah, just in a sympathy sense, like if you woke up and all of a sudden all of a sudden I had a vagina, like, but I was the same person, what would I do? And it's like, you know, it's so of course I would try to transition back to my own body. Like it's just that's all it is have some sympathy. Um, do you think Fire and Blood 2 will ever come out? I do. I think Fire and Blood Part 2 has a fair chance. I'm not saying 100%, but I think it has a fair chance of coming out versus probably has a greater chance of coming out than Winds of Winter. Because there's an actual show like on the air that that deals with it, and another one in production that has to deal with it, and they definitely want some information on it, and I think it'll be crapped out, much like a lot of Fire and Blood, with like filled with like inconsistencies and stuff like that, just like you know as quickly as possible. But I think Fire and Blood has a decent chance of coming out. I think that could be put together pretty easily. Um, Tyrion describing his Essos Leia as dead on her feet. Yeah, I mean that's definitely gets the idea of corpse handler, meat house man kind of idea in there. Because I mean, in the end, like if you're having sex with someone who doesn't want to be having sex with you, you know, like how is it effectively like, different from masturbation? I mean, I guess your body is stimulated more, but there is something very weird to it, right? Like, part of sex is like feeling like you're connecting with another person and like having an intimate moment with them. And if the other person doesn't want to be there, kind of takes that away, right? So it's I mean, this is why people like certain porn stars, right? The porn stars that can like really act like they're enjoying it or that they're feeling it, So Tyrion's experience with his sex worker is like being with a corpse. Yeah, fair enough. Yeah. Stupid to ask, but is A Song of Ice and Fire your favorite story? I don't know. I'd like to. One would think like it would be a story that is finished would be my favorite story. I mean, a lot of things of like the channel and everything has forced me into analyzing the book and being into it more than I probably would have been. Where you kind of have to make the videos and reread and everything and stuff like that. So I've had like a very different relationship now with A Song of Ice and Fire. Meanwhile, there are just super fans that like know the story backwards and forwards, and just because, like, who know better than me, just because. And that's very interesting because I was kind of like, I was into it, but like, the channel forces me to be into it as well, producing whatever 1,000 videos. So it's I have to think about like what would be my favorite story. Like, where the characters like come together and it's like fitting, and where everything comes together. There's definitely things that are very, very have impressed me and stuff, various movies and various shows and stuff like that. So I don't know. I'd have to put a lot of thought into like what my favorite one is. It's hard to rank things like that, right? Like even when people ask me like what's my favorite food, or even the ridiculousness of like when we're young and they're like, what's your favorite color? You're like, I mean, we all have to choose, right? Even though, do we really have a favorite color? Yeah. Do we really have a favorite food? I mean, give me on a different day. Didn't JFK start as a president who listened to everyone, but then after the Bay of Pigs, he realized that the military generals only wanted war? Well, that's interesting. What was the name of the book? I'm trying to trying to remember the name of the book that kind of listed the presidential um, style, and I'm trying to remember. There is a there was an interesting book that you can read. Um, there is an interesting one on. There's actually a professor who got a lot of the cabinet, the ex-cabinet, to the presidents, and went and had an interview like years after the fact, and like did a whole like um, series on it. And I'm trying to remember that too. Um, oh well, it's so it's so hard. It's such a rabbit hole to find this stuff. This is a lot of stuff like I read when I was in graduate school for public policy. Um, but it's yeah, it's too bad I can't find it. Um, but yeah, no, I'd never heard that JFK was like turned off by. Maybe I had heard that he was turned off by the military generals, but I know that he was definitely like really influenced by RFK. Um, Let me see here. It may be why he stopped listening to everyone in general and started listening to RFK. It might have influenced stuff. Huh. Huh. But certainly he would have thought after Bay of Pigs, like, you guys suck. I don't believe anything you say about. I mean, wouldn't any of us, like, after Bay of Pigs? Because he was assured during Bay of Pigs that, oh, it'd be like, this is going to be easy. We're going to be met as liberators. It's going to be fantastic. And then we were just, it was just, um, it was just ridiculous. Um, George R. R. Martin plus sex equals cringe. Yeah, but I almost love how it's so cringe. Like sex is awkward, right? Um, and you know, sex is awkward. It's a really weird thing. Um, and then you start imagining that like so many people in the world that are very funny looking and weird looking have sex. Like and so this, you know, so this idea of like Sam having sex, and then you think of like George R. R. Martin and all like moments of his life, like, it's just it's very just the thought of it, right? Because you read like the Sam chapter and everything, and all of that, and you're like, yeah, no, this dude like had a life, he had relationships, he had sexual relationships, and you're just imagining this like really weird dude like like having some weird sex. And the thing is, like, I've heard him talk about many times about how much he loved like cons, because you go to these sci-fi cons and like everybody was like up for hooking up, which also made me like really like oh god. And I've had him like who he describes as being a fox and stuff like that. is also kind of funny because he'd be like, oh, this one person was a total fox, and it'd be like, that person is a solid 3, and it's like he's like, oh, they're a fox, you know. So I don't, you know, so he's clearly out and about, like having fun at different times in his life. Like, don't get me wrong, you know, but and he's definitely writing from experience, which is almost like the thing that's like most cringe. Do you think Sandor is the Gravedigger? Do you think he will return to the main narrative? And if he does, will he fight his brother? So I think that it makes no sense that Sandor is the Gravedigger, but I think he's the Gravedigger. Like it's silly. It's absolutely silly that Podrick Payne, who very much knows what like the Hound looks like, and Brienne, who I'm trying to think if Brienne has ever met the Hound. I guess Brienne has never met the Hound, but nonetheless, Pod has. So it's just weird that they would be in some area where like the Hound is considered one of the tallest people in Westeros. So like Ned in his head starts like at one point in the Game of Thrones thinks about the tallest people in Westeros. And he's like, "Oh, well, there's the Hound and there's Hodor and there's the Mountain." And so it's completely ridiculous that they would show up at the Quiet Isle and see this really tall dude in a cloak, and and his horse is here, and not for them to be like, "I wonder if that's Sandor." Like, it's so dumb. It's so dumb. It's as dumb as Theon not knowing it's his sister and like, making moves on his sister, or like Mance Rayder sneaking into Winterfell to like get a look of people. Like, just ridiculously unlikely. That said, narratively speaking, no, it's got to be, right. Like, how else would the stranger, the horse stranger, be on the island? Like, that horse like doesn't respond well to anyone except for Sandor, and it has to make it through the maze. So I can't think of any other way that horse would be on the island except through the Hound. Like, so it has to be, but at the same time, it's really silly that it is. And so I think he's going to return to the main narrative. I hope he doesn't. I think his story is well and done. I think it's a good ending to his story. I don't think there needs to be more. That said, the only thing that makes me think he would return is the fact that like there's more books and everybody keeps talking about him. But I don't think he needs to return. I think he has a pretty nice ending already. I don't see why George R. R. Martin just doesn't release The Winds of Winter in 2 parts, pleases fans, publishers, doesn't break the 7-book rule. Dance was released incomplete, so why not? It's a good question. I think part of it is that George likes to take Easter eggs from the end and bring it back to the beginning, thematically. And so there's little things like that might be in there. Also, he tends to write characters all at once and then go back and start another character as they go. So, when he says like, "Oh, I'm 3/4 done," it could be that like one character is well beyond the end of the book and another character has hardly started. So that I think is a big problem, is that some characters well in the beginning of the book have not been finished. So yeah, I mean, I do think it would be a better solution, because in the end, like, you would just have to, I mean, when I mention situations like this of like some characters you might not have gotten to, then you start saying, well, okay, how many chapters would that be? Like 4? Like, couldn't he just write 4 chapters? And I'd be like, yes, that seems like very doable. But yeah, it's he should do that, but I think it has to do with the fact that like he doesn't want to throw Easter eggs back, and then he has Easter eggs and he wants to throw in and stuff like that from the end and bring it back to the beginning. I mean, if we're going with like a Dance with Dragons, he had this big problem of all of the characters arriving in Slaver's Bay around the same time, and when they would arrive and what to do. And that actually happens at like what, the 3/5 point? Like it's not exactly like the end of the book. But let me look up the chapter list again. It's not exactly let me bring this up. So we're talking like where is like the Windblown in 20 is pretty early, and then it's really about what I think Quentin arrives at, like, is that like Daenerys 8 or something? It's gonna be right before the dragon. The Queen's Guard discard a spurned suitor. So I want to say Quentin is arriving around like chapter 50, which is like the 2/3 point of the story, right? So maybe some, and then in the Dany story, there's definitely some elements that he added that are from stuff that happens at the very end. Like you could talk about how like burnt bones prove nothing. Like that's added. That's something that happens at the end that is from the beginning of the Daenerys story and stuff like that. So I think he's fearful of stuff like that coming up. But which it's funny because as we're writing the fanfic, we're just going one chapter at a time. We'll probably run into those problems where like we'll be near the end and we're like, fuck, should have had that earlier. Just so we can always change. We can always change stuff as we go along, but it's that kind of stuff will happen. But yeah, I would appreciate that to be broken into two, but I think it has to do with the fact that he writes a whole character and then goes back and writes another character and wants to put in Easter eggs. Why do you think Mel feels stronger at the Wall? Could it have something to do with the Black Gate? Well, I mean, I'm trying to think about how like magic works in the world of Ice and Fire, and and I think a lot of it has to do with belief and what you're able to believe you can do. And I have this feeling because of when you read Varamir Sixskins, his mentor talks about what's taboo and what you're not allowed to do. And he tries to limit Varamir. And Varamir believes that he can go beyond it. And he becomes the second most powerful telepath that we kind of come across in our story, the first being Bran, right? So I think there's something to do with that like Mel feels like she's at a magical place. And so any sort of like telepathic like abilities she has to manipulate the world, it's because she believes it, So I think it has to do with that. Is there something magical about the Wall itself that is enhancing her powers? Maybe, I don't know if like, I try to think about it in a sci-fi way, like are there electric fields or something that can enhance her telepathic abilities or something like that. She describes it as being at a hinge of the world, where she feels kind of stronger. But it might be there might be something physical around. I'd like to avoid just like it being something simple like, oh well, the wall is magical and therefore she can do magic. I'd like to feel like it's more like belief of some sort, like or that there's I don't know, some sort of sci-fi electric field that's enhancing it. Um, uh, let's see. I don't know, man. I love guns. I was a Marine, got my degree in chemistry and philosophy, and then PhD in something so specialized that people would laugh at. Polyketone synthesis. I think we love. I think we love the weird. I mean, I think like obviously if it's like part of your job to deal with something, you're going to have more interest in it. I mean, you can get me riled up about Social Security. I worked at Social Security 1 year, and you can get me riled up about Social Security. Um, uh, Even though I only worked there 1 year, but it's like, it becomes a big part of your life because it's part of your job. Like, gun was part of your job, and so you're going to have an interest in guns. But I think there's a difference between like interest in and being a nut. So like when I talk about like being a nut, I'm talking about like it defining your identity and like thinking that you have some sort of like social credit or social status because of it. Like it affecting you socially is the thing. And I have all sorts of like weird little interests, but I don't know how much they define my identity. Like when we look at like Kyle Rittenhouse, like this was a guy that clearly he didn't have any friends at school. He wasn't liked very much. You can tell, like you see him in interviews and he's kind of an insecure guy. Young, I actually think there's hope for the guy, but who knows what the right wing talking circuit's going to do to him. But it was very clear that he was like looking for camaraderie. He was looking for a gang to be part of, and that was his main insecurity. He was looking for friends, and so like the whole like cop worship, gun circles is where he found like companionship. And so like, but his kind of like insecurity is very apparent. I mean, some people join the military for that reason too, though I'd say most people join the military because they want a job, So it's things like that. I mean, there's other factors to it, but when I talk about being a nut, I'm talking about like all you do is talk about it, and you want to own the libs, and you want to defend. You think that like protesters are going to take you out and stuff like this. Like when you actually look at like surveys of like why people buy AR weapons, a third cite self-defense. 33% self-defense is the reason they bought it. And you're like, what person needs a semi-automatic rifle for self-defense in American society? They must really think that a mob of people are coming after them. Because if it was self-defense and you just thought like, oh, what if somebody breaks in my home? That you would have a handgun, right? There's no reason for like the overkill. Like they literally are thinking like a mob is coming for me. And the other things like 5% lists like owning the libs as like the reason. And like another 5% it's like, or another 10% is like, it looks cool. I think 10 or 15% like are hot for hunting, which, is probably like, hunting is like probably the least abysmal reason on there. Like when you look at like what the reasons have like people have, but even hunting, I'm like, that's pretty overkill. Like how are you supposed to eat that? Like when you've loaded it full of lead. But so it's it's like a lot of the reasons, like what is it? Does it define your identity? Do you wake up every day and like need to put on a shirt that says, like America, love it or leave it, and have a bunch of guns, Second Amendment right, and like go to rallies and you think guns are cool, and it's that kind of thing. Um, versus just like being into something, it's very kind of different. Um, Plus, it was like I said, it was your job for a while. Of course, that you're like forced to be into it because it was your job. You're gonna remain an interest in it. Um, did Epstein kill himself? Your thoughts? Yeah. I mean, he probably killed himself. I mean, yeah. I'm not much for these like crazy conspiracy theories. Um, uh, the Carmine was asking me about whether I thought like the government was hiding up aliens, and I was like, no, no, no. Like it's just conspiracies are really hard to in real life. Conspiracies are really hard to keep going because they somebody always like spills the beans, so it's too much. But yeah, I don't think there's anything too sinister. He just killed himself. His life was going to be in prison, and he didn't have anything else to live for. Is it plausible that Rayla spent over half a year in gestation sanctuary on Dragonstone during Robert's rebellion and did nothing to secure the welfare of her last living son, despite all of her assets, money, men, and maester? Um, yeah, I mean, you bring up a very good point. Um, But there's a lot of these like weird things in the story, and again, this is like part of like the Dornish master plan. Like, what the hell was Doran actually doing? Like, why did he do so little for Quentin? Why did he do so little over the decades on his like mission of revenge? Like, he didn't lift a finger to do anything. He, how is that really a plan? How did Rayla sitting there on Dragonstone do nothing? Um, it is uh, it is a bit of pretty big plot hole, and I think that you're right in the fan fiction. There should probably be some explanation of like what she was doing for her escape plan, um, unless she's just like out of it. I don't know. It's just so weird, right? That like she would just be like, you're surrounded by this is coming. You just have Dragonstone. You know that they're building a fleet. Like, what are you gonna do? What are you gonna do? You've got to have an escape plan, another escape plan, right? Which is probably like the four loyal men and the maester and everything and the money. I mean, I guess she did give enough jewels and everything that they survived a while, but maybe some of the places they stayed originally were set up by her, or the house with the red door, or whatever. Huh. But no one ever considers Rayla's role, right? She's just such a passive non-character. She's just an incubator, which is too bad. It's not a very well fleshed out character. Now that we're talking about it, yeah. Um, Have you listened to Dan Carlin's Hardcore History? Best podcast, hands down. Huh. Hmm. Um. Oh, okay. So it's like unorthodox broadcaster Dan Carlin takes his Martian unorthodox way of thinking and applies it to the past. Was Alexander the Great as bad of a person as Hitler? Um, oh, he's been doing it forever. He's been doing it since like 2006. Jeez. Huh. I have not actually listened to it. But I'll see. I'll see. Um, that's interesting. Oh, maybe in the future I will look at it. I haven't been able to listen to once you kind of leave like car culture, and I'm not in a car culture here, like you know, your podcast times like really drop. You know, in America, I was listening to like a lot of podcasts because I would be driving my son to swimming practice, and so we'd like listen to you know Planet Money and Freakonomics were usually the ones who were our go tos because both my wife and I have an econ background. Um, what's your favorite straight to DVD movie? Oh my gosh. Um, let me think about this. Does I'm trying to think of like the good ones because I'm trying to think. Wasn't the Suicide Squad count as straight? Because that was straight to streaming. But I don't know. Does it have to be before that? Does it have to be like? Um, does it have to be like from the era of of like bad movies? Let me see here. Let's see. Um, some of the lists I've seen are like Wrong Turn 2, some movie called Unthinkable, Universal Soldier, Day of Reckoning, Stretch, Ninja, Tremors 2, Aftershocks. That was an okay movie. Trick or Treat, Get the Gringo, Wolf's Creek 2, The Man from Earth, Undisputed Last Man Standing, Tucker and Dale versus Evil. Oh, people talked about that. That's been I have not seen that, but everybody like raves about Tucker and Dale versus Evil. Maybe Tucker and Dale versus Evil is the best one. I mean, I haven't seen it. But like going with ones I've seen, like straight to video. I'm like, I guess is Tremors 2. I mean, if Suicide Squad doesn't count, because the Suicide Squad was pretty awesome. Um, who killed JFK? Lee Harvey Oswald. Like I understand that like Lee Harvey Oswald's situation is weird. Like don't get me wrong. Lee Harvey Oswald was crazy dude. Like Lee Harvey Oswald was like Lee Harvey Oswald. He was in the military and was stationed in Japan and got into a relationship with hello.
You, what is the haps? Am I echoing? Did you turn on the echo thing?
On. How you doing?
Oh, nothing. I'm surprised you didn't end up making the stream title that thing we talked about, making fun of those gun people.
Yeah. I mean, I talked about it a little earlier, but no, I went with the
Mm-hmm.
time loop. Time loop. Thought it was interesting. Um, uh, so Lee Harvey Oswald was a weird dude. He was in the U.S. military, trained as a sniper. Was stationed in Japan. While in Japan, got into a relationship with a Russian woman. Became really interested in communism at that point. Then came back to America, decided he wanted to move to the Soviet Union. So he snuck into the Soviet Union at some point. Some people think he went over the Finnish border and then showed up at the US Embassy in Moscow to renounce his US citizenship. And then both the Soviet Union and America didn't know what the fuck to do. They're like, oh my God. Like the Soviet Union clearly didn't want him. The US did like had a situation that made him look bad. Like an American citizen wanting to renounce the citizen to become a Soviet. So the US and the Soviet Union like sat down for a while and they're like, fine. He can renounce his citizenship. So Lee Harvey Oswald became a Soviet, and then the communist government and the Soviet Union gave him a job, and then but they were spying on him because they didn't necessarily trust that he was not a spy. And he married a Russian woman who also had like her father was in the KGB, but wasn't everybody's father in the KGB. I don't know, you know. And then he becomes disillusioned with the Soviet Union and moves back to America and decides that it's not Soviet communism. That's not the way. It's Cuban communism. So he gets involved in all these like Cuban communist groups, and then decides he wants to kill JFK and use them, you know. And so it's really weird because yes, he was such a weird dude that a lot of different groups were watching him. Like the FBI and the CIA and the KGB were watching him because he was fucking nuts and bonkers and had a weird life. But, you know, beyond that, like, do I think there was any conspiracy to kill JFK? No. It was a crazy dude. It was a crazy dude. Um, and that's it, you know.
I'm gonna ruin a lot of people's ideas and fantasies here about asking you about conspiracy theories. Number
Hmm.
one, Preston is a federal employee. Stop it. You think if he knows anything, he's gonna tell you?
Yes.
Number two, when it comes to conspiracies, like it's funny, you're the theory guy, but you're not the theory guy when it comes to like literally everything else. It's so because like you and I are
Yeah.
opposites of that. Like I believe in a lot of the I think the CIA or something in government killed Kennedy. You don't think so? You think it's just Oswald, right?
Right, right. And like this is the big difference between like fiction and real life. Like I believe in real life, I believe that the world is kind of chaotic and that conspiracies are impossible to coordinate, they're impossible to keep a secret. When we're talking about fiction, we're talking about like worlds where remarkable coincidences happened and it only takes one author to decide that this is an idea that he's
Right.
putting in there. And so the big difference is like, can you get 100 people to decide on something versus one person with fiction? So when I talk about like when people are like, oh, Preston's a conspiracy theory, he's like Alex Jones, the only conspiracy is George R. R. Martin thought of that and put it in there. Like that's the only conspiracy theory. It's pretty mild, you know, versus like in real life there's hundreds of people coordinating everything. Like, you know, that's the big difference. Like when it's just fiction, like, well, a person decided on it. That's it, you know.
No, I get what you mean. I just find it funny, like when it comes to like conspiracies and anything in real life. Like, nah, you're no. The most simplest explanation is the real. What's that? Occam's razor, right? The most simplest explanation usually it.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, certainly in real life. I'm not sure if I, you know, a lot of people like apply Occam's razor to a lot of different things, like, and you know, Occam's razor doesn't apply to fiction, like, because fiction is trying to make an interesting story, you know, so like, you can't use Occam's razor in that situation. But
By the way, that works against you because you do work for the government. So people are always going to say, I don't know.
yeah,
You might know something. That's why I always ask you about stuff like, what have you heard? Like, you heard anything?
yeah.
You could tell me. I could keep a secret. I got you.
I mean, Occam's razor. If we apply it to the real, like applying Occam's razor to movies, it's like isn't like in Back to the Future, isn't it just more realistic that like Marty is insane and he's been in an insane asylum the entire time? Well, yes, Occam's razor leads us to that opinion versus like he time traveled, you know, to the future.
I never heard that theory. That's a
No, I
theory?
mean it's just like you know anything. I've just made it up right now. I'll be right back. I gotta visit the restroom.
I love how he leaves and I have a coughing fit. No, Preston is probably checking with his CIA handlers on whether or not he can reveal certain things.
Okay, Occam's razor on Back to the Future is he was actually like on LSD, like, because really it doesn't
I
make
like
sense that
that.
this high school boy is like hanging out with Doc Brown. So I imagine that he's going to Doc Brown because Doc Brown is like cooking drugs for him. and that's where he's getting like his LSD. And he like took a big dose of LSD, and that the Back to the Future trilogy is really like Marty on LSD. Yeah, yeah, Carmine, where'd you go?
Sorry. I'm having like this fucking coughing fit. Do I still have? You sure it's just a lingering cough? That's it. I don't got like super AIDS or whatever the fuck, because
I
this
have
thing has
no
been going
idea.
on
I
for
have no idea.
eons. Fuck.
I agree with George R. R. Martin on sex cringe. Nothing more cringe than listening to Roy Dotrice narrating sex scenes with Littlefinger and Lysa. Oh, Patire, oh, Patire. Oh, Roy Dotrice. Yeah, I mean, the thing is like it's funny because it's like Roy Dotrice has that like stuffy British accent, but of course he's theater, so like he at the same time he's like pretty open to all those sorts of things and has heard about all of those sorts of things. Like in theater communities, people are pretty liberal and sexually progressive, but it's funny nonetheless to think about the whole thing. George R. Martin having sex, Roy Dotrice reading sex, man. Um, I don't know. What's your opinion on the Ice and Fire sex scenes, Carmine?
Yeah, I'm gonna be very honest with you. I try not to go into the audiobooks. I can't. When it comes to Roy the Trees, may he rest in peace. I'm good. Someone actually in the comments said there was another audiobook guy, a guy by the name of Roy Avers, who was like the original narrator for Game of Thrones.
Oh,
And
really?
yeah, I'm trying to find some files here. Apparently, according to this person Roy made Tyrion sound like a 1950s gangster. So I kind of want to see if I can find
Oh,
this
fuck! It's
and
all
send it
on
to you.
YouTube, dude. It's
Is
all
it
on
on YouTube?
YouTube. It's all on YouTube.
Did you just look it up?
Uh huh.
Oh shit! Let me see.
Yeah, yeah. It's all on
Roy
YouTube.
Avers.
Yeah. Been up
Avers.
since January. We'll see if it ever gets taken if it gets taken down. But like,
I'll download it just in case. Whoa! What's this cover? What is this
oh,
cover?
That's the British retro color cover of Game of Thrones.
If okay, this looks like the Wheel of Time cover that
Mm-hmm. Yeah, yeah.
Wow, okay.
Um,
That does not look like Game of Thrones.
yeah,
Whoa.
yeah. I'll put this on the screen for people. So it's the British re-release of Game of Thrones. Oh man, now I've got to like. It's hard to find that, but here I'll let me grab I'll at least screenshot it, even though it's gonna have a a big thing in the middle. So yeah, this I'm sorry for this YouTube thing in the more in the middle, but nonetheless, like so when so when putting out the cover for A Clash of Kings in Britain in the UK, um, they went with a traditional fantasy author, fantasy artist, as opposed to what they had in it, and then went back in time for Game of Thrones. Um,
Looks pretty cool. Are you ever
yeah.
going to do a video on all the covers?
I could. There's so many.
Mm-hmm.
It's interesting the original guy who did the original Game of Thrones cover, which is just the chair. Like he's kind of an interest. He's like originally he's more of a graphic artist, and he just like finds stuff and puts it together, versus like a painter. Um, and so Game of Thrones cover is kind of unusual, different from the rest, in that it's just kind of what a graphic artist kind of like came up with and then like put forward. Um, and then they come up with new covers, and then they re-release the ones before so that they match and stuff like that. So every time. So when people say like, oh, is this we were talking about this with that Winds of Winter cover, and it's like, well, Like that style was a little too close to A Dance with Dragons, you know, and so they like reinventing the wheel and then re-releasing the books so everybody can so they kind of have a set that matches. But yeah, it's one of those videos that I could do. But there are a lot of them. You know, you could do one where you just cover the major ones. Like, do you have this copy? Well, the reason you have this copy is this. You know. We need Sweet Robin 9000's Canon Judgments. Shreen's Robert Seed. Seed is strong, referencing the Targaryen portion of Baratheon ancestry. Gilbert King. This is the first time I've heard that Shireen could be Robert's bastard. that Robert was banging Shireen. That would be something. I think
You mean Solis?
I mean, I'm sorry, Solis. Robert was, oh god, I'm sorry about that slip. Robert was banging Shireen. Oh gosh, that's bad. Oh gosh. Um, uh, but um, hold on a second. This is funny. This is weird one. So American Social Security Administration is a mess. Actually, like, um, when people do rankings, Social Security Administration is always ranked highest on best place to work in government. I mean, I worked there and it just seemed boring, but it's a well run agency. It's a very well run agency. Anyway, sure. The problem with like Robert banging Solis is that Solis is mainly on Dragonstone, and so Stannis is going back and forth every once in a while to Dragonstone to put in his annual duty to try to get Solis pregnant, and that she you know, that's the reason she doesn't get pregnant very much, is he's hardly having sex with her at all. And so Robert to have a reason to go to go to Dragonstone to be something. But is Stannis shooting blanks? And the only it's just the idea of like would Robert be into Solis? That'd be something. You know, like Solis is not described as like attractive or anything like that. You know, she doesn't seem like very fun. She doesn't seem like Robert's type.
You're so nice to these like people who come out of nowhere with these dumbass theories. I would just disregard it. Like,
I mean, if he's half
like,
joking, obviously, but like,
is he?
yeah, obviously, but like, I think it's just kind of explore like a fun route. Like, could Robert have gotten with Solis? Which, man, that would be something. I mean, it's weird because Robert bangs her sister, yeah. Who does he bang at the who's Edric Dane's mother? Isn't she? Not Edric Dane. Edric Storm. Edric Dane. Yeah. So he did bang Delina Florent. So maybe at one time, I mean, I guess you would think that Solis would be, you know, around the same attractiveness as Delina, and so maybe when maybe Solis was more attractive like 10 years ago or something, you know, and it was on some trip, you know, and that she needs to get it's not unheard of. It's something that George R. R. Martin would like retroactively put in, and everyone would go, what? And George R. R. Martin would go, haha, got you guys, you know. But yeah. Are the Starks naturally politically inept? I'm trying to think about Ned was fairly politically inept. That is true. And you know, Sansa's a little girl, and Rob didn't really know what he was doing either, but he was a child. But so we're really going with like adults, like our, um, do we have? I don't think Catelyn was politically inept, uh, but she's not a Stark by blood, so does she count? And then John is going to be the closest to being politically not inept, despite the fact that he gets stabbed. But he does at least think about problems and tries to come up with solutions. They're perhaps too progressive for everyone, but he at least does think about it. So John, I mean, it's not good company, but John is probably like the least politically inept of the Starks. But everybody else is a child, and it's Ned, So what are we gonna do? What are we gonna do? I mean, Brandon was an idiot, like marching into King's Landing, getting himself killed. Like that was really stupid. Um, you know, his father like didn't keep his Southern ambitions strategy secret enough or something. So yeah, I
I like how
guess.
Brandon wants to march into King's Landing after finding out they stole Lyanna. And the entire time, that's a long way to King's Landing. The entire time, none of the people with him are like, maybe we should rethink this. The entire
Like
time,
what
everyone's
are we
just
gonna do when we get there? Like honestly, what are we gonna do? Like it's Ares. I've heard he's insane. Like, it is true. Like the ride, like they have this idea that like, oh, Brandon's a hothead, so he like marches into King's Landing, but it's like it's a slow horse ride over the course of many days. Like I get like written like, oh yeah, no, he's a hothead, so he like marches into King's Landing, and it's like, but he's
it's one thing if he's like right next to King's Landing,
right.
sure.
It's one thing
Like,
if he's just like running, he's like in the courtyard and he like runs in, like that's one thing. But like for a fucking fortnight, he's like riding, camping, finding firewood, like like
maybe he runs into a bandit. Oh, just get really
on a
upset the entire
horse.
time.
Oh my god. Man, what an idiot. Oh man, that's really funny. Oh, Carmine making me laugh. Um, um, I always switch. I was like, was that the last? Yeah, yeah, yeah. Okay. I feel like I can assume that you're an atheist. LOL. Do you think morality is relativistic, or is there an objective morality or objective truth out there than metaphysically who done it? No, they're first of all, there can never be objective morality. There can never be objective morality. Okay. So, like, even if you believe in religion, okay, there is not objective morality. Like, one, like, God's like religious doctrine, it contradicts itself. But also, the doctrine that it puts out, you choose which ones to follow and which ones to ignore. You choose which ones are important and which ones aren't important. Okay. Like nobody's sitting there like in the Old Testament, it very clearly says that you should not wear clothing that's like multiple blends of fabric. Okay. Yet all of us wear clothing today that has multiple blends of fabric. Now, we all consider like that's stupid. That's stupid to think that like I would that's important, right? But I'm making a judgment call. Like, murder versus that, right? So like there is never any objective morality or objective truth. There is none. Like so like remove that idea. Like there's none in religion. Like even there's none outside of religion. There you can never ever 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 have objective morality. Okay. So That's it. So now the problem is that like morality is relativistic versus we're talking about you've swapped in the word relativistic versus subjective. Um, so like when people talk about relativistic, they tend to mean like when we're talking about like if I'm on top of a train versus you're on the ground, we both seem like we are um, moving at this. We both seem like we're staying still, and the other person is moving. So like perspective is relativistic, and with that term relativistic, we have the implication of equal. That's not different from subjective. There's no implication of like, yes, morality is subjective. Morality is what you decide it is. But that doesn't mean I believe that like morality is like my morality is equal to other people's morality. Like, of course, I believe my own morality to be superior. Versus say like when I say like, oh, like people's opinions on whether or not broccoli tastes good is relativistic. Like I personally think broccoli's fine. Some people hate broccoli. Some people love broccoli. I don't think that people that love broccoli or hate broccoli are good or bad because I think about broccoli taste as relativistic. Now, even if you're talking like, so yes, morality is subjective, but then some morality, despite being subjective, can at least be internally consistent. So one thing is like you can look at somebody's moral code and you can judge that moral code to see if it's internally consistent. And in that sense, like you can there are qualitative judgments you can make about like that moral code. Like, does that moral code make sense? Now, no moral code makes sense 100%, but some moral codes make sense more than others. So and so people love swapping these words in. Every once in a while, I get people saying like when people say like, oh, like slavery. All right, slavery is something that just like is factually a subjective like thing. Over time, society came to the point where we decided that slavery was immoral. Okay, I personally think slavery is immoral. Society has come to that general idea that it is immoral. But it's subjective because like obviously 160 years ago it was not immoral. But over time things changed. And then someone will come in and be like, how can you claim that slavery is not absolutely immoral? And it's like, oh my God, you're like trying to like use the word absolutely like in a weird way. Like, like I can sit there and be like, oh my God, I absolutely love sushi. Well, no, like, I'm not saying objectively like sushi is great. Like there's confusions here. So when presenting the question, like one, we need to like use consistent language, subjective versus objective. Like don't switch it up with like relative versus relativistic versus objective. Okay. But long story short, there is no such thing as objective morality. None. Zero. Can't have it. Of course, morality is subjective. Of course it is. But that doesn't mean that like just because morality is subjective that we can't qualitatively judge it. Oh, da, da, da.
By the way, to bring us back to this, someone said, "I always thought Brandon was near King's Landing when that went down. No, I always thought he was in River Run. Hold on, let me look this up real quick. Let me see this. Yeah, right here. From River Run, Brandon left to join his father's wedding party coming down from the north. They were on the way back again to River Run for the wedding when word reached Brandon of Lyanna's supposed abduction by Prince Rhaegar Targaryen. So somehow Rhaegar. Okay, so I need you to have like the map up. So somehow they're right in the middle of right between River Run and Winterfell. So let's say they're maybe somewhere in the neck, maybe a little further up. Somehow Rhaegar passes them and then takes Lyanna and comes back down, and no one is none the wiser.
Yeah, it's it's so the implication based on, and I'm maybe going a little far when I say the implication. The implication, when you're on the boat, and the implication, um, so it's is that she is on the lake. She's on the God's Eye Lake is the implication of where she is abducted. And the reason for this, as we kind of know, is that like in the in a Dance with Dragons, where you have the Wayward Bride chapter, you they have the girl on a horse fleeing, and she's beside a lake, you know. And so the idea is that she's getting abducted somewhere around the God's Eye, because we're talking about wayward brides, right? It turns out to be Alice Karstark in the vision because she's fleeing a wedding. So there's an idea that perhaps Lyanna fled away from Brandon and then is found by Rhaegar and then is brought back. But nonetheless, it's in this vicinity, which is still may not be 2 weeks, but it's still like 10 days. So it's still like
So the world of Ice and Fire says the fall of the dragons, the year of the fall of spring. Next year, Leon I am face to face with Rhaegar, 10 leagues from Harrenhal. 10 leagues. What's that like?
10 leagues is 30 miles.
So
30 miles is nothing.
The God's Eye, you think so?
Yeah. I mean, 30 leagues from Harrenhal is still on the God's Eye. I mean, the God's Eye is huge. It's on the lake somewhere. Yeah. People who think Epstein didn't kill himself don't understand how common suicide is in prison. It happens way more than anyone realizes. Yeah, I would think. It's a depressing, horrible place where you have nothing to do all day and there's no hope, especially if you have like years, you know.
Well, the theory behind that is that they put him on like suicide watch, and there were like supposed to be 2 guards like keeping an eye on him, making sure he's not doing anything that looks like he'd be killing himself. And those 2 guards just coincidentally fell asleep. That's where all the theories come from.
Yeah, but
that he's supposedly going to testify against a lot of powerful people, and once you get the Clintons involved in there somehow, then because Hillary Clinton is the Thanos of the political yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's also like, how realistic is it that 2 people are going to be like watching a dude with their full attention at all times? You know, like that's not a realistic situation. You know, so people get bored. Their attention goes other way. You know, you can't. 2 people, like even if you were telling me, I mean, I don't even know if that's true, but like if 2 people like are supposed to watch you, you're going to say that like at no point there's going to be a point where like they're not paying attention.
Oh, I didn't know this information. People are saying the camera shut down too, so we don't get to see how he did it. Apparently, I didn't know that.
Mean, I don't know how they would have all that information, like, like it coming out that the camera shut down or whatever. Like it's I mean, I haven't seen any like reputable sources like talk about these sorts of things. So like when people say something like a conspiracy thing, like, oh, they're like a camera shut down, well, it's like, well, first off, like what source do you have that the camera shut down? Like that I would have to start with that. Like, are you talking like, did the Washington Post write that the camera shut down? Like what's our source on that? Versus just like random person said something and therefore I'm going to believe it.
Bro, just Google it. Do your own come on, do your own research.
You'd have to like present me with like firm source on like where this stuff comes from, like what, like how are people finding out about this like camera, like who's telling them that. Mike Queen Rayla reached out to Prince Doran via Raven and been successful. One could sail directly from Dragonstone to Dorne, and she knows Viserys has kin at Starfall who would embrace him and raise him could Darkstar be Viserys III. I mean, their kin is fairly distant at this point with the Danes. but nonetheless, besides that, like could someone be, could messages be sent to Dorne, and could there be a place for them to hide? That all sounds very logical. It's certainly what I would do if I were somewhere on Dragonstone. I'd be looking for places to escape. But of course, like going to Dorne just kind of like delays the inevitable. I mean, it may be that like across the Narrow Sea or the House of the Red Door was a better plan, and that they went with that. Um, you know, versus Dorne, where like he eventually has to give you up, and then he's part of the Seven Kingdoms and stuff like that. So it may be that Rayla was setting up House of the Red Door. Maybe the House of the Red Door was all her idea. We don't know. Um, but and did they come up with a swap? Possibly. It's something that people would think about. Body doubles. I mean, certainly Tyrion thinks about body doubles and swaps. So yeah, I mean, all that's very logical. But could Darkstar be Viserys the Third? I think they'd be more protective of him if he were actually Viserys the Third, versus Darkstar. Darkstar is a little out in the open, versus like a random peasant or something. Let's see here. Would it have been better if Catelyn was sent to be Hand? I mean, Catelyn would have been fine Hand, but I don't know if it would have helped, like in the situation where it made the most difference, which was like dealing with Renly and Stannis. Like Stannis is still a sexist, you know. He had
Well,
been like,
at
oh,
least Littlefinger wouldn't be working against her.
yeah, yeah. I mean, but everything had. I'm trying to think. Everything fallen apart at that point, right? Like Stannis never agreed, and then Stannis never agreed to the council. She wanted a great council, and then Stannis didn't take her seriously. The question is like, is there anything Catelyn could have offered that would have changed Stannis's mind that she didn't offer? You know, um, I don't know. I don't know. Stannis was fairly close to. He was certainly thinking about a marriage alliance with the Starks. Crescent had kind of introduced that idea. He didn't think it was horrible until Selyse kind of cut him off. Had she tried harder on like a marriage, great counsel, maybe if she just like had she just like said like, fine, we're gonna declare for you, Stannis, and then gone back and tried to convince Robb, maybe that would have worked. Oh, it's tough. Would people have taken her more seriously? Probably. The problem is that she's also dealing with like the Northerners, and like they're sexist, and would they take Robb less seriously if she were Hand and stuff like that? I mean, Stannis is a sexist, but at the same time, he's very practical. So I don't know. Like, I mean, he accepts Mel as his like main advisor, obviously, but would have respected Catelyn more if she were Hand. Yeah, maybe, but I still think he was so stubborn. Like he just believed that he was king. I'm not sure there was much that would have taken him off of that position of him like needing to be king, and Renly being in the stronger position and not wanting to be king, and not and wanting to be king, and then having conflict. Is there anything she could have done to bring the brothers together that was not in a porn kind of sense? I don't know. I mean, that might have brought them together had they all just like had sex together, the three of them. Ren, Renly, Stannis, and Cat. Cregan was pretty politically fierce. Could he have made himself king if he wanted to? If he wanted it? At that point in the Hour of the Wolf, I think I think he probably could have. I think he probably could have pulled something off, um, had he offered people the right marriages and the right power. I think he could have probably pulled it off. Uh, I'm trying to think like why even like I think that the settlement of Aegon the Third was kind of a settlement of like this person represents none of us, and therefore like they can kind of rule. He's somewhat he's more Valarian than anything else of all the people that are the last man standing kind of situation, right? He's more Valarian than anything else, so it's kind of maybe Corlys's decision. So like had Cregan like made some real offers to Corlys and thrown some bones to the High Towers, I think he was definitely in a situation where he had the power to do something like that. Um, as weird as it was, you know, um, especially they're so interested in getting rid of Targaryens at this point. If we're accepting the conspiracy that it may have, but maybe him not being faith of the Seven would have been his probably biggest barrier. Um, that's my guess, but I think it's he was right there with all his forces. He definitely had the problem. Um, uh, uh, uh. Let's see here. Do you think there is knowledge that we can know a Pori? Um, or is it just all a posteriori? And how does morality fit into knowledge? Aporia is an irresolvable internal contradiction or logical disjunction in text argument theory. Um, are we talking? That's my headphones falling to the ground. I don't know. This is an odd. This is sounds like a this sounds like a larger discussion that I would have to research back on. Like, can we be at a situation of like understanding and accepting contradiction, and that and be fine with that? The letting either contradiction or mystery or something be an end state, which I don't know. I don't know if that's the nature of people. They're always going to like try to find a logic to it, right? We live our lives on logic, and logic doesn't necessarily fit with the world around us. Like light being a particle and a wave at the same time. We can't really, our brains can't really comprehend that contradiction. So we just tend not to think about it. It's the same with like we can't really grasp infinity, so we just tend not to think about it. It's the same with morality. I do think it's like morality. Like morality doesn't really make sense. So we just don't think about it. Death like doesn't really make sense, so we don't really think about it. Um, but the idea of knowing that, I don't know. I don't know if the human brain can comprehend certain things that aren't even necessarily complicated. Like it's not like the concept of infinity is complicated, but we can't imagine infinity. You know, um, it's not like the concept of duality uh, is complicated, but we can't comprehend duality, like the duality of the nature of light. Like that just doesn't make any sense to people, so they just can't they just can't. Um, so um, so I don't know. I just don't think so. Though I suppose like the question itself would be a kind of unknowable thing. So can we know the unknowable? Um,
You have reached the end.
I know. Who knew it? Who knew? Who knew? Oh, um, um, Bloodraven equals God Emperor Leto. Bran equals Sienna Atreides. Yeah, I guess so in that respect. Though there is something weird with there is a little bit beyond that with I don't know if like are there and again I'm not huge on the Dune theory, but is there any belief that like Leto is not actually in control and that the worms are controlling him? Like at least with Bloodraven, there's a question of who is controlling who. Is he a puppet or is he a puppet master? Like, are the children of the forest and the werewood net like controlling Bloodraven? Like that's a mystery of like blended consciousness. And so I don't know if like um, I don't know if there are questions of whether or not like the worms could be controlling Leto. I mean, I don't know if anybody's like deep into Dune theory, but you know, but we'll see. We'll see. That's something to think about. That like it was the worms the whole time, man. It was the worms master plan the whole time was to get Leto to like join with this freaking trout and become a giant worm and then rule for thousands of years as a worm man. So have you read Dune, Carmine?
No, but I listened to the fantastic Dune podcast, which is no longer up. I know Leto's the son, right? He's Paul's son.
He is well it's funny because there's three Letos. So there's one Leto the first and two Leto the seconds. So the
Hmm.
second Leto the second is the Leto that joins with who becomes a worm in the story and like rules. Uh, so um, is Leto circumcised or uncircumcised? I've actually seen different versions of him where he looks different, so it depends on the version. But like
I
sometimes
doubt
he,
we'll ever get that in film. That's not gonna. They can't do
so
that.
yeah, I mean, obviously the worms are like, I mean, dicks are worms and worms are dicks. Like we're gonna accept that like there's huge phallic like ideas with like the worms in Dune, right? That just kind of goes without saying. So,
To Miss Rachel Bow, you're welcome. Last podcast on the left, they had a phenomenal Dune podcast on Spotify with Henry Zabrowski and Holden McNeely. Preston, I know you think those who are those two Australian guys from the Daily Planet looking logo you thought was
yeah,
funny.
yeah,
You thought they were funny? These dudes
yeah.
are the funniest podcast duo I have ever listened to. Holy shit. I can't find their Spotify Dune podcast anymore, but it was so good. They're so hilarious. They're so good.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, it's yeah. With the Weekly Planet, it's like one guy's funny, and the other guy is the one that runs it. I mean, the other guy's fine. He's interesting, but he's like the other guy's there purely to make jokes. He's like constantly finding an in to make a
Hmm.
joke. He's just sitting there, like, you know, he's taking his improv classes and he's like trying to find a joke, and then he's going to bring that joke back later, and like it's very calculated comedy. um I was talking about the philosophical concept of knowledge being known before any experience of Pori, or are we just blank slate like Locke said, and everything is known after the experience, a posteriori? I think that I would say that I would probably lean towards the latter. Like I kind of think that we you know things happen to us and then we realize that they happen, and we and so I think that that's, you know, I definitely like believe like there biopsychology stuff on a fundamental level that says that we like make our decisions before our conscious mind like lets us know we make our decisions, but we also like become the people that we are before we are even aware of ourselves. Like, you know, we start really becoming aware of ourselves at like age 4 or after. We're well into who we are at that point. Like, right? Like our parents have already shaped us, our DNA has already shaped us. There's so many things in our life that are completely that we just can't, you know, you can't have control over. That you know, you can look at an optical illusion and understand that like there are things that like you know aren't there, but you perceive. You know, we all have holes in our vision, like here and here. You know, where our optic nerves go into our eyes, and our brains just naturally like fill in the gap and make it seem like we don't have a hole in our vision. So it's just, you know, there's so many things about the world, like we are of the universe, like that we live in, like, you know, the things that we crave, like we're human beings that crave love. Oh right, because we need to crave love because we need to procreate to exist. You know, we take breaths because we live on an oxygen world. You know, we exist in a world of space and time. We're all products of the universe reflecting back. Like we can't, you know, we're not like empty vessels of knowledge, like learning. Like we experience and then have our biased like perspective after the fact of everything. So um so no, I think that like things experience and then you gain the knowledge after, and filled with all of the biases of a human being existing like that. um Will book Cersei find herself in a situation as shows Cersei in the Blackwater episode where she almost poisons Tommen? What if Tommen turns into a white Valonqar Tommen? So certainly that scene in Game of Thrones is it's influenced by a little bit in the book with Ilan Payne shows up as like, and Sansa thinks that he's there to like kill them all if things go south, so that there won't be any um, hostages and such. And you know, there's this the you know, does Ilan Payne like he's the, you know, if Sansa is correct, and we don't know if Sansa's correct, this is just like Sansa's idea, but the, you know, would that include like Cersei and Tommen? Was that the implication when George R. Martin wrote that? Um, and I don't know. You know, obviously George doesn't like to write things definitively, um, but you know, it's kind of like we perhaps already were there. You know, if Sansa is correct. Um, Let me see if there's an actual. Does she actually write anything? Uh, oh well. I'd have to. I can't find the like exact quote of it, but I remember her like thinking that he was at least there for them. And I don't know if it was like the implication that he was just there so they wouldn't leave the room, but or if he was there to actually like slaughter them all so they would be hostages. Um, so I mean, so we kind of already have it, but I mean, where she almost poisons Tommen. Um, it's funny because it's also there's like the theory that like Cersei, uh, perhaps is the one that accidentally poisoned Joffrey. Um, that's like because Cersei was in charge of planning Joffrey's wedding, and so the idea is that had she planned the poisoner that uh, they'd poisoned Tyrion's pie and then Joffrey ate it, and that's all would be brutal, kind of George R. R. Martin kind of thing, and interesting though.
Was that your theory, by the way, that everyone was trying to poison like a certain specific person and it got all mixed up?
Yeah, I mean, I certainly I did a video on it with the purple wedding. I mean, it's certainly not my theory. This is the weird thing about um like what it's weird that like a lot of things get associated with me and then are owned by me and then somehow and then that affects their fate later. But anyway, I think she does think that Tyrion killed Joffrey in A Feast for Crows. So she's at least like she'd have to be like delusional to that degree to like misremember if she's actually the murderer. But on the thing, like when I talk about like it's not my theory, but like it becomes my theory, and then that affects things like because there are people that in the community that hate me, right? If a theory gets associated with me long enough, when a like list of like what are the major like you'll see for a while like what are the major theories in Ice and Fire, they'll purposely delete Preston theories, but like sometimes they're not originally my theories, but because I've talked about them, they become Preston theories and then they get deleted from like lists of theories.
Who
And
would
like or
do
like
this?
was that
Who would do these
I
things?
know who would do these. Or like say you have a group in which a Facebook group or a Reddit post, that you'll bring up a theory that's not even my theory, but because I've talked about it, it becomes my theory, and then all of a sudden it's not allowed to be talked about on Westeros.org or a Facebook group or it'll get downvoted in in on Reddit. I think Quentin is Alive is like a probably a major one, or like R plus L equals D. Like those weren't my theories. Like I didn't come up with those. They were really big theories. They were really big theories before I talked about them. And then once I talked about them, they became Preston's theories, and then they became taboo, and you can't talk about them. Kind of funny. Mm. But yeah, I think certainly I didn't come up with Cersei poisoning Joffrey, but like I talked about it once, and so it becomes like a Preston theory. And so then if you bring it up, it's going to be like taboo to talk about. Uh, um, are there any major story changes you expect in future seasons of House of the Dragon, such as different character fates, more dragons at some point? Yes, absolutely. I think that some of the things that we're expecting is obviously as there's the ripples of Laenor being alive and um, Alan and Alan of Adam and Alan of Hull. I think they're going with completely different stories for them because in Fire and Blood they are the bastard children of Laenor, and one takes on Laenor's dragon. But the show went full Laenor's gay. And so it's like, our Alan and Alan, that changes the relationship of like Adam and Alan of Hull, and like, for instance, like in Fire and Blood, you can wonder, like, does Rhaenyra not like Adam and Alan of Hull because they're bastards, which is what's presented as one theory, but and is claimed by Gildane, or does she not like them because they're the bastard children of her husband, and she doesn't like them in the same way that Catelyn doesn't like Jon? Like, like, which was also clearly like George R. R. Martin's intention. Like, they're going to go away from that. So we're going to have a major difference with Adam and Alan of Hull. We don't even know if there's going to be two of them. I think they cast the guy from Raised by Wolves. Did you hear about that, Carmine?
They cast Father from Raised by Wolves. I
Mm-hmm.
wonder who he is going to be. You're right. He could be at. Who do you think he's going to be? Adam of Hull?
Yeah, I think he's going to be Adam or Alan of Hull.
Hmm.
Which I mean, he's
Hmm.
the wrong age. He's clearly um, not going to be Laenor's, kid, which takes away an enormous plot point that like Rhaenyra didn't like them because they were bastards for the same reason that Catelyn didn't like Jon Snow. Like that was like a major part of Fire and Blood, but well, it's fine. But like,
That's fine.
I think they're going to increase Bela and Rhaena's roles. I think that needs to happen. I think they're going to do that. Uh, Bela and Rhaena have very very small roles, and I think they're going to try to increase them a bit. Um, let's see. I'm trying to think. I think they're going to expand. I thought they were going to do it first season, but I was wrong. But I thought they were going to expand like the Stark role and the Pact of Ice and Fire and stuff like that. They might move around. A lot of people think there's going to be a move around. Like Jace is just too important of a character that they don't want him to die as early as he does in Fire and Blood because he's pretty damn close to dying. Like plot wise, like where they've gone. Like if you know uh, Battle of the Gullet happens pretty soon. So it's
By the way, I don't know if you want to have you seen the news about the casting? Because there was four people cast, and we don't know. Honestly, you're probably right. Adam of Hull and um, um, you just said his name is. Why is it escaping me? The other guy, um,
oh
Cor-
um
Corlys's bastards.
oh
They
well
they
they people think
they
that Alan and there's an accusation by
Alan.
Mushroom that Adam and Alan are Corlys's bastards instead of Laenor's.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Here is the article from Redanian Intelligence, by the way, which I really enjoy. Potential House of the Dragon 2 casting. Download that picture if you want. So we have Kieran Bew, Abukar Salim, who played Father, Gail Rankin, who I think is going to be Alice Rivers, and Clinton Liberty, who might be the other whole brother. So
Is there
I
a
think they're both. I think Abu Bakar. Sorry,
oh
I think
geez.
he and Clinton are going to be uh, both Adam and Alan, and
Let's go into
she
this.
might be Alice.
There's so much shit here. Oh my god. This is
Mhm.
like we could do a podcast on this. Uh so this changes so much. Okay. So this dude has cheese. Like first of all, if if you're casting somebody as cheese, like I guess it's not Laurie Strong, like Mark Stewart as cheese. Um James Doherty as Clay. Um who is Clay? That's nobody. Some character named Clay. Maybe they didn't want blood. They want clay and cheese. I don't know. Okay. Um, Kieran Bew is just called Warrior. Maybe that's like I imagine if somebody's named Warrior, it's he's going to be part of the Faith of the Seven Zealots that kill the dragons. Would be my guess if you're naming somebody Warrior.
Might be
Um,
just a placeholder name because they don't want to go into detail for spoiler reasons.
yeah, fair enough. Um, Alice Rivers, that's yeah. I mean, she's a little young for Alice Rivers, but okay. I mean, they even hinted that maybe Aemond would be into older women. Um, but yeah, the Clinton Liberty and Abu Bakr Salim, like they seem a little. They're still old to be Leonor's bastards, you know. So it takes away that mystery. Ah well. Oh well. But yeah, I think they will move stuff around. I mean, they move stuff around so much for season one and already. So I think that they're um, but like more dragons at different battles. Yeah, I think they'll probably I'm gonna imagine that they're gonna shove Bela and Rayla in a dragon battle at some point. Um, just because they can. Like, seems like something they would do. Um, and just because you need characters that have been introduced. Like, you don't want to throw in Daron, fucking, like
I haven't
Daron.
seen cast Daron yet. I'll have to ask Dragon Demands. He's usually on top of this immediately,
Yeah,
but
yeah.
I don't know if they
He's been
cast him
super
yet.
busy with a backlog of videos he wants to do. Um, uh, would Bloodraven's story be a good show? Um, he's not very likable. Maybe if you make him like likable. It's like saying if is would Eamon's show like be a good show? Could you do a whole show on Aemon? I don't know. Like, I don't imagine Bloodraven as being a likable character, but so it's tough to have him as a protagonist. But um, unlike say Corlys Velaryon, who's like very likable, you know. So uh, I don't know. I don't know. You know, like people still don't like their. Um, I mean, there's cases like House and stuff, but like having some like creepy one-eyed guy, creepy, skinny, one-eyed guy who's really pale. Would people want to tune into that every week? Um, I mean, I guess that's Witcher more, except that he's buff. Even with Witcher, Carmine, they made him much
Hmm.
more likable and relatable than like Book Witcher, right? Isn't Book Witcher kind of like out of it?
In the books, I believe he talks a bit more than he does in the show. Henry Cavill does this like weird, like grumpy Henry. He does this weird
Mm,
grumpy Geralt that's like
gotcha.
I don't really get that. I'm gonna be honest with you. I'm more into the games, and for me, the games are the gold standard of how the character should be. Geralt is not like super grumpy
Yeah, I mean, I do kind
in
of
the game.
feel like they rely on Henry Cavill being likable and us knowing and liking Henry Cavill versus like liking the character of Geralt. You know, like there's
Hmm.
nothing he really does that like makes us want to like him. Mm.
Hmm.
Do you ever listen to Chapo Trapo House? My proper socialist friend got me listening. Matt Crispin talking 30 Years War is pretty interesting, I have to say. I have not listened. I mean, obviously I see it all over the place, but I have not actually I've not actually listened to it. Um, so unfortunately, but everybody talks about it. Is it
For a minute,
Chapo
I thought
Trap?
he meant Come Town. For a minute, I thought
No,
he
no.
meant them. No, it's a different. It's a different one.
Chapo Trap House. That's what I thought it was. You put Chapo Trapo House. Chapo Trap House. Um, yeah, no, I haven't listened to it too much. So if Bran is going to become king, how do we get there? What is the argument that convinces lords of Westeros? How do the Faith and the Maesters agree to be ruled by a tree god? Um, I mean, if it were going to be happening in the so it's weird. So I've thought about this ending a bit, and I think like my way of making it work was mind control because it doesn't really make sense. But like Tyrion's explanation at the end is so loopy and weird that it does seem like a George R. R. Martin thing, where he's like, "What binds us together? What binds them together? Like stories, but no, no, that's not what binds people together. Like, no." That's if stories bound people together, like there wouldn't have been a million intra Christian wars and a million intra Muslim wars. Like of course stories don't bind us together. Like it's so like on the face of it wrong, but at the same time it's like loopy enough that I think that like only George could say it. Like I don't know if like D&D would have come up with something so like weird. Stories. Who has the best story? Bran the Broken. Like it's ugh, I don't know. Like it's just like so out of left field that I almost feel like D&D couldn't have come up with that. It would just be so weird for them to come up with something like that. That it felt like George. I don't know if George is going to continue on with that idea, and obviously we're never going to get a Dream of Spring, so like we're never going to get to that point, so we kind of don't have to worry about it. But um, you know, if Bran were to become king, I kind of see mind control as being the thing, or I suppose in the same sense of like Aegon the Third being like the person that no one wanted on the throne, Bran being the person that no one wanted. Like he represents nobody, so let's make him king because all the rest of us have interests or something, something like that. Might be something. But yeah, it's very silly. It's very silly. um my apologies. Text to speech sucks. A priority versus uh, posteriori theories of knowledge. LOL. LOL. What would you say about us ever understanding knowledge and objective reality? I don't think we can understand objective reality. I think that we are all born into, um, in a social sense, we're born into the social environment that we have. I mean, even in the sense of the language that we learn first, um, is going to color like how we perceive the world. An example of this is like in English, it's very easy to quantify time as money in the same sense. We spend time, we waste time, we invest time, um, and so like an, an English perception of time thinks about it as something like that. Not all languages like talk about time like that. You can talk about time like a distance. And conceivably you could think about time as something else. Like how long until something occurs is a lot different versus like how much time do I have, and like that little difference is going to color like how we perceive reality. And we're stuck with those situations. Like we're stuck. Like how can I, even as an American who speaks English, like I will never know what it's like to not be part of like the global language of English, and how that affects things. Um, but also to like understand metaphor and analogies, like you need to understand, you need to have knowledge of those like things like for in English we use a lot of sports. American English, we use a lot of sports metaphors, like that's in my wheelhouse, or he scored a touchdown. Like you have to have a cultural knowledge of something before that metaphor makes sense, and we understand so much of the universe through metaphor. We don't really understand things by themselves nakedly. We make metaphors to them. We can't even understand time without making a metaphor and making it into distance. Like physicists can't even like separate time and distance. Like they're at such a point where they're like, well, they're the same thing, and you're like, are they? Are they? Like, um, and maybe a physicist will be like, time and distance are the same thing, but or we so in a linguistic metaphor that we can't break out of that of that thinking. But even beyond that, like metaphysically, we people talk about like our perception of things and our perspective of things changing things. Like relativity and quantum physics and stuff like that, and choosing paths of reality to go down. So, um, I don't think there can be objective reality. Um, you know, I don't think there can be like in an absolute sense. Like obviously in a practical sense, there's objective facts, but like the sky's blue. That's I can kind of objectively understand that, but like you know if we really like go down deep, we would say like, oh, that's just our eyes perceiving a certain wavelength that makes us like think about things in a certain way, and so we're always associating the sky with things that are cool, even though that's just a wavelength of light and stuff like that. But I mean, logically speaking, I think we live in a very, very subjective world. And what's fun and interesting is that when you go through life, you have all these experiences that reshape yourself and all of a sudden like make you connect to somebody else subjectively, which is a very interesting experience. Like before I had kids, there's so many things I didn't understand about kids and like parents, and all of a sudden you understand, or like a person in your life dies and all of a sudden you understand something about like what it's like to lose and have loss. You have sex and you get in a relationship and you figure out things about sex and relationships, and opens your mind to like how other people perceive the world. But that's just the process of life. The process of life is like discovering more and more subjectivity and relating to it and stuff like that. But uh, uh, I was actually thinking about like Carmine likes to send me like every person that trashes me in the community,
That is
and
not
sometimes
fucking true. You know that. That is
he loves
not
to send me
true.
like every message, and like it just gets me
That is not
thinking.
true.
It just gets me thinking because I'm just like, oh my god, like I've had this channel for what, like, how long has it been? Like 8 years? Yeah,
Yes.
8 years, right? And I'm just like, wow, so much has happened in 8 years, like so much. Like, God, like had the channel, like I my father died, I got engaged, I moved to Germany, I got married, I moved back from Germany, I had a baby, I had another baby, or I moved to Taiwan, I had another baby. Like so much has happened to me, and how much has changed. I'm like, I've lost my hair. Like like there, I broke a finger. Like so much has changed. um and it's weird to think about like people that haven't changed, that like you can still be hung up over like things that happened like 8 years ago, that like you can have such little sympathy and like understanding of like the world and like trying to connect to another person, that you could like still be in the same place after fucking 8 years. Pretty
Okay,
ins-
well, I agree with you on that one. That's 110%. This is
yeah,
something I actually had to break it off with someone a while ago because she just wasn't growing as a person. And
yeah,
like, if you're the same person as you were like back then that's not a thing. And to defend myself here, I show you so we can laugh at those idiots because their reasons for like trashing you are fucking
yeah,
ridiculous. Like that one Reddit mod who was upset that you are doing the fanfic, even though you're not
mm,
making money on it, but you're somehow doing YouTube, making money off that, and also working for government. He was just upset you're making money. He doesn't like you, and he's upset
right,
you're making money. It's
right,
basically his entire like book
right. I
of a.
mean, to like go out of one's way to have the least charitable interpretation of something. um and just because, but it's like clearly from some sort of like held belief for like 8 years, like to refuse to possibly sympathize with another human being. And it's like I spend a lot of time like trying to understand other people's perspectives, and so it's very heartbreaking to me and upsetting to me that like I put in all of this effort to try to understand other people, and other people put no effort, like no fucking effort at all trying to understand another human being. It's just like, nope. you know I mean, I feel this feeling about politics as well. Everybody's like, you need to get out of your bubble and explore and understand what other people do, and it's like, I do that. I don't think anybody else is doing that. But like, I certainly don't think the other side is doing that. But like, everybody's like, oh, you need to like open your mind. It's like, doing my best. But it breaks my heart that I like run into people where it's just like, holy shit. Like, you're the same motherfucker. You're the same closed-minded motherfucker, like trying to find the least charitable like way to perceive the world. It's amazing. It's amazing.
I feel like you
Ah,
wouldn't have a lot of friends like that because you hang out with like a pretty. I feel like the people you hang out with, because you said earlier in the stream that if you were hanging out with your friends and you told them you bought a gun, they'd laugh at you. I
yeah.
feel like most of your like the people you chill with, like in person, are people who have actually grown as adults. They're mature adults, right?
Yeah. Sure. Yeah.
Except for that one person you know who did the crypto scam. That woman.
Oh,
That was some
no. I
stupid shit.
mean, first of all, I knew her 10 years ago. That was like when I
Mm.
lived in Egypt. Um. Yeah. Did we talk about this in the stream ever? About the
Yeah, yeah.
crypto
You you you
crypto
you
rapper
mentioned it to
girl?
me. You mentioned it
Yeah.
to me. We didn't say her name or anything, but you're
No,
like, yeah,
no,
and you
but like,
mean
yeah, the crypto rapper girl, like, like I knew her in Egypt, and like she came to a couple of my parties, and like very nice. Um, but yeah, it's just kind of funny. Yeah. Um, uh, any chance of discussion of dragon dogfighting tactics? Think we'll see any World War II style formations in House of the Dragon? Huh, that's really interesting. I had not thought of that. Um, but yeah, there's an entire world of like interesting um, fights and stuff you can have in there. Because like the descriptions aren't really like there's not much of it in Fire and Blood. But you're right. Like what are the dogfighting techniques when you have like smaller planes versus a larger plane and stuff like that? Um, huh. Yeah, I don't know. Yeah, that's some interesting stuff. Um, that would be a fun thing for Fire and Blood. I mean, for House of the Dragon. I don't know if they'll do it. I mean, they certainly didn't do it with Vagar and uh, Arax. But they did their best to make that fight interesting, and it it was. But it's interesting to think about it in a dogfighting kind of sense. Um, because what we have up against, like, let's see, most of the dragon fights are unmatched dragons, where it's like Vagar versus, right? It's Vagar versus Arax, and then it's like um, Rook's Rest is Vagar coming upon Melis, and then God's Eye, Vagar versus Caraxes. I suppose maybe you could try to get some sort of Tessarian like versus situation with Silverwing. Huh. That's interesting to think about. um, Speaking of Daron, we'll probably never see him interact with his family at all, unless they deviate from the source material. I don't know how the writers plan on getting people invested in him. You are right that he we're past the point in Fire and Blood where they would have any interaction. However, I do feel like they need to, right? Like I feel like they need to have um uh they need to have I'm sorry, I read a really funny comment and I was like, oh gosh. Um but I feel like they would need to have a scene between it with him and Alicent at some point. Like I feel like they've just like forced that. Like Alicent going out and meeting him at some point. I just feel like that would just be the uh the thing that would happen. This is just really funny. David Lightbringer looks like the male version of my ex-girlfriend, so I can't look at him without feeling uncomfortable. It's like, wow, that's a crazy. That's a crazy. I mean, yeah. That's that would make me uncomfortable too. I mean, I argue if Caraxes wanted to win, he could have. That's interesting thought that Caraxes like wanted to die. Um, but yeah, I think that there, an equal dragon fight would be more interesting. Um, uh, yeah. Um, Got to try to stay young. Who can really say that they are living without shady in-laws randomly offering you meth? I mean, young people. I think it's good to spend time with young like people with all ages. I do. It gives you really great perspective on things. I mean, even in the sense that you like it keeps you certain things keep you alive, but also certain things give you good perspective on like how far you've come, and like I remember when I was about uh when I was about 29, 30 years old, I was dating a girl who was like 23, and we had a bad breakup. And I'm like explaining it to my other friends who are like 30, and they're like, and all like it seriously came like a million times in a row. I'd like tell the story of everything that happened, and the first question was, "Yeah, and how old is she?" And I go, "Yeah, she was 23." And they're like, "Oh, well, that explains it all." Like, and it was like so dismissive. I was like, "Oh my god!" Like, it was just that, right? Like, it was just that, like, you were dating just someone that was immature, like, and it was just, but it was, it was very, very funny because it was an of course situation. Like, had I been listening to the story, I would have said the same thing. Like, oh, of course. Like, well, there's 23. There's a lot of things that people do, and you kind of like Carmine tells me stories all the time where I'm like, well, of course you're going to do that. You know,
Oh wait, what? What? What do
I'm
you
talking
mean?
mainly about your, relationships and stuff like that.
Oh Jesus, yeah,
Yeah. Well, I'm like, of course you're going to do that. You're young, like
yeah.
I don't need to do that kind of stuff.
It's
You
true.
know.
I've been 29 for many years now. By the
Mm-hmm.
way, real quick, I've been trying to find out who's going to play Daron in season two. This one person on Twitter said that this actor was cast as Daron. Source Deadline. I'm looking,
Mm.
trying to look for the Deadline article. I cannot find it.
Yeah,
So
Deadline's
I
usually
do
a good
know.
source. Yeah.
Yeah, I can't find it. I do know that I think Allison's brother was cast. Which didn't we see Allison's brother go up against Damon in like the pilot episode?
Yeah, yeah.
Right.
I
I
mean,
don't
she has
think
a
we ever.
bunch of brothers, so it could be anybody.
Right. So I guess maybe if they're going to remove Daron from the story, we'll probably just get Allison's brother as the main guy in the Reach, who's running around fighting everybody. Um, Maybe that's one of the cast members from the four people we saw. So I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, some
Maybe
people say like, oh, his symbol is in the beginning with the trails of blood, so they have to add Daron. And I'm like,
people notice that. Like, yeah, I will always be
no one
surprised
notices that. Like, I'm saying, like, it
at
takes super fans to like sit down and go frame by frame and try to figure it out, and it still doesn't add up. Like
oh,
that's
that's
how
what
bad the
YouTube's for.
beginning
But
is,
still,
how
like,
bad the
if people
opening
can.
is.
Uh,
Hey Preston, got a question. Which of the Seven Kingdoms do you personally believe have some of the best lore attached? Could be houses, cultures, history, etc. Um, I mean, I've always been most interested in Dorne, and it's mainly because like you've got a history in um Essos blending with a history in Westeros, and then you've got like different ethnicities in within Dorne, and their kind of and their effect on things. Obviously, not as much time has been put into Dorne as say House Targaryen or House Stark or but I like Dorne the most. But then again, it's also like influenced by Mediterranean culture, and I have more fascination with like Mediterranean culture than I do with British culture. Um, but that's me. So I'm kind of biased. Um, but But yeah, I mean, I think the most lore is written about House Targaryen, which is, it's fine, it's good. But I prefer the interesting things I find about Dorne. I just think they're more interesting, um, even though there's so much more to say House Targaryen. And finally, let's have this the last one, and then I gotta go. Been on here for my voice is gone. Um, I hope that you're asking your questions about the nature of reality, morality, nature, and even causality are trying to understand your educated opinions, which I live for as I'm only on my second PhD defense. Jeez. I mean, it's quite a compliment that like you're, you know, getting your PhD and asking these questions to me because I don't have any like background in philosophy. Like, I just besides like randomly reading stuff and like trying to figure stuff out. Um, and so like I don't have that like precise um, you know answers about that. Um, I mean, if you want to like I mean, I really like Cosmic Skeptic. I think some of his videos are very good, and um, I think he went and got a divinity degree, a philosophy degree, and stuff like that. And so I think he has a very good um, way to describe things very basically and easily. And it's not too different from the way I think, though he was a vegan and stuff like that. And um, but but like I say, I just read some random stuff, read literature, read some very base level stuff. Like I'm sure if I were getting a PhD, people would laugh me out of the room in philosophy or divinity or anything like that. Um, so yeah, I just kind of like have a general from my broad experience, have a general kind of idea about things there are things you can't really know. I kind of like think that like scientifically and that a lot of these logical questions are dead ends because they're contradictions and we'll never get to the end of it. But in a practical sense, we just kind of do what we can. Um, Crazy how Preston and I seemingly watch the exact same YouTube channels. Yeah, the sometimes I laugh that like as unique as we think we are, that sometimes I run into people that are exactly the same. Like once Obama was getting sworn in, and DC we had it off for a week. It was like a once in a lifetime thing where we had an entire week off for his inauguration, and that was because of where Martin Luther King Day fell and where inauguration day fell, and just the rest of the week was declared off. And I decided to go on vacation, and I remember like being in a taxi in Panama, going back to the airport with a guy who had the same job, who like did the same sorts of things after college, like lived in DC, like we like it was the exact he was had also decided to get out and go to Panama because it was like the inauguration. Like it was the exact same freaking story. And I was like, I think I'm like an original person, and it's just like the same dude. So I mean, 8 billion people. That's what we end up with. Anyway, thank you everyone for sticking with me. Carmine, thank you for hanging out too.
Thank you for having me. By the way, before you sign off, someone said the Daron casting was April Fools. So
Oh,
yeah,
okay.
we're probably not gonna get him. Did you talk about the Sam chapter? When that coming out?
Sam chapter is I'm waiting for one last editor to have a round on it, and then I'm gonna record it when my voice heals. But it should be out fairly soon. But things aren't really delayed. I mean, in the meantime, I like the first Tyrion chapter I passed to the editors too, so like things are still going forward. So don't think things are like all delayed and slowed down. It's just waiting for one editor to have his last go on the Sam chapter, and then I can record it. And but I will say I fucking love the Sam chapter. I think it's awesome. I think it's incredible, and it's long. It's long. but we'll see if it's like it'll be my favorite chapter or not. It's pretty it's gonna be close. So I don't know. I still think I might like the prologue or Elaine better, but Sam's gonna be good. Maybe I'm talking it up too much, but it's a fucking great chapter. Sounds good. Sounds good, Carmine. Is that a good answer?
Oh no.
Carmine's been asking me
Wait,
like every day.
wait, no, that's not.
He's been like sending me a message saying like, when's the Sam chapter coming out?
No, yeah, cause I read it and I'm like, okay, and I thought it was pretty good, and you're like, no, we're waiting for this one person to George R. R. Martin ish like the whole thing. I'm like, oh, okay, cool, cool. I love the quote you used. You said about this person. You said the chapter's good. We all like everyone put their 2 cents in. The chapter's good. But we're waiting for this one person to make it great. I'm like, oh, okay, cool, cool, cool.
Yeah, yeah,
So.
yeah. So yeah, no, one of the well, all my editors are really great, but I like to have them all have their like look because they each had their thing, and so I have a very good editor that we're waiting for his special hand as well. So
Mhm.
yeah, so that's it. All right, man. Talk to you guys soon. Later.